Release that witch eye by Ermo. Chapter 881, 100 Times Yes. The sun gradually sank behind the mountains and forests, gilding the surrounding clouds. The color of the sky was shifting slowly from blue to white then to red. In the end, the last drop of sun cast a crimson shadow on the thick grassland. At the end of the Guyland family's domain, there was a bulging slope. Standing on top of it, Nightingale could see her family's houses, farmlands, and forests adjacent to the mountains. When she had been little, she had liked to sit on his father's shoulders and ascended the slope to see the complete picture of their property. When her parents' bodies covered with bruises and wounds had been sent back and her servants had asked where she had wanted her parents to be buried, she had chosen the slope without hesitation. At the time, she had been extremely upset at her parents' death and had had a hard time believing they were actually gone. She had wished at some point her parents could open their eyes. In that way, they could see her and her brother, no matter where she and her brother were in the mansion. Now she once again visited her parents' tombstones, but with a totally different attitude. There was not much dust on the tombstones. Obviously, somebody had been constantly dusting them. Bending over, she put a pile of neatly folded white paper in front of the two tombstones. It was Viscount Somy's judgment. Faced with the indisputable evidence, the Viscount soon collapsed. After Roland promised his underage children would not be punished for the crime he had committed, he had admitted his crime of smuggling Dreamland water and had also confessed the entire process of taking the Guyland family's properties. It turned out, beneath the valley that between the two families' domains, there really are buried treasures, although it was not a gem mine but possibly a gold mine. The one who had discovered it was a farmer working for the Somy family. Due to the different geographical positions, what the Guyland family referred to as valleys was actually at the ground floor of Somy's domain. Farmers of the Somy family had often fetched water and bathed downstream. One day, a lucky guy had found gold dust in the spring water coming down. He had then asked others to help further search for more gold, which had thus attracted Somy's attention. Instantly, he had prohibited them from spreading the news and sent his men to search for the origin of the gold dust. Yet the result of the search had greatly disappointed him. His men had indeed found more gold upstream and they had speculated that the coarse golds in the river had been a result of the sag of rocks caused by constant water erosion and seepage. However, an increasing amount of evidence had shown that the gold ore might be close to the Guyland family. As such, they had had no choice but to suspend the exploration. Due to the special status of Silver City, the numbers of knights and supporters local nobles were allowed to own were more or less limited, so Dot could not just take the gold mine. Seeing that he really wanted this huge treasure, he had laid his eyes upon Viscount Guyland. He had started his plan with old Guyland, a distant relative of the Guyland family. He had a simple yet ruthless plan. Considering old Guyland had no title nor manor, he had tempted old Guyland to cooperate him and promised he could make old Guyland the master of the Guyland family under the condition that old Guyland would give him a piece of land. Old Guyland could not resist the temptation of becoming a real noble, so he had agreed to help Dot. Dot bribed the rats to kill Nightingale's parents during the refugee riot. Then old Guyland took the chance to take in Hyde and Nightingale and helped to manage their domain. Old Guyland planned that when Hyde entered his adulthood, he would force Hyde to waive his manor and title, which was as easy as pie. After all, an heir without parents was just as helpless as a bird in a cage. If any other nobles had a problem with it, they could only blame old Guyland for being too greedy. His plan would have been completed, but Nightingale's awakening had sabotaged his plan. On the day of her adulthood, she had killed old Guyland and disappeared into thin air. Old Guyland had never got the title he had dreamed of even in his last moments. Somy had to alter his plan. He could win old Guyland over, but he could not get everyone's support from the Guyland family. After all, he had only had one bargaining chip, the title. He had to make the best use out of it. Ironically, he had turned to Hyde in the end. When Nightingale had first heard about it, she had found it ridiculous. The thing that was meant to be Hyde's was used as a bargaining chip for Hyde to earn, yet Hyde was naive enough to believe Dot would help him. So he did not hesitate before agreeing to Dot's proposal, the man who had murdered his parents. With the Viscount's support, Hyde stood out from all his relatives, who were contending for power and wealth, and successfully kept his title of nobility and became the official heir of the Guyland family. According to their agreement, he would merge with the Sommi family. He had done so not because he had wanted to keep his promise, but because he had had no other choice. After going through internal strife, his family's industry was on the verge of collapse and most of his subjects had left. After plotting for 10 years, the Viscount had finally gotten what he had wanted. He had even saved enough capital to exploit the mine little by smuggling Dreamland water. Once the mineral vein was located, the wealth that the Sommi family could gain would last for centuries. But Roland destroyed his ambitious dream. For a likely gold mine, had murdered fellow nobles, making several families fall apart. A vicious scheme, which led to the death of nearly 20 people, ended with a noose around his neck. From beginning to the end, he had not been able to take a glance at the gold mine. Taking out the flint, Nightingale burnt the judgment paper. She had heard, from Roland, of an ancient way of mourning, which was to shape paper into the appearance of the item one wished to deliver, burn it, and then the deceased would be able to receive the present. Since a fire could connect spirits, smoke and fire with special wills had a chance to pass through the gate connecting the worlds of life and death, especially at dusk when the two worlds were the closest. Through this ritual, Nightingale wished to deliver the message that the murderer had been executed to the spirits of her parents. Although Roland also said that he actually did not agree with the idea of the worlds of life and death, she did not care that much. She was not so much comforting her parents as she was comforting herself. By the time she walked off the slope, the sky had turned completely dark. Roland was waiting for her not far away. The moment she saw the familiar figure, she felt relieved and safe. Is this really okay? Letting him go unscathed? Roland twitched his mouth. I've been longing to teach him a lesson. Oh? As who? Nightingale asked, raising her eyebrows. Ahem, Roland coughed twice. Of course as a king. Nightingale shook her head, smiling. It's over. I'm done with him. If you really want to teach him a lesson, you can send men to take him back and beat him up again. Since you've dropped the matter, I'll let him go, Roland said, spreading out his hands. Right. Nightingale suddenly stopped walking, knelt down, saluted with her hand across her chest as she did when she had pledged her fealty for the first time. She said, Your Majesty, could you allow me to always stay by your side and serve you? Why do you suddenly mention this? Roland was startled. Haven't I agreed? Because I want to hear it again. Nightingale insisted. Roland shrugged helplessly, walked to her side, stroked her head, and said, Listen carefully, yes, 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 yes. 100 times yes. Are you satisfied? The magic string did not vibrate. Instead, it was as peaceful and soft as the earth under the curtain of night. I'm so lucky to have met him. Nightingale curled her lips into a smile and said, As you wish, Your Majesty. Chapter 882, The Return of the King. Translator, Trans-En Editor, Trans-En. The king was coming. Since Roland Wimbledon's troops were stationed in Redwater City, the discussion over this event filled the streets and alleys of the old King's City and reached its peak when the Lord of Silver City submitted to Roland. Although a fraction of people repeatedly emphasized that Roland did not ascend the throne, compared to his previous titles as rebel king and invader, most of the civilians still believed that the future king of Grey Castle was none other than Roland. A coronation was probably the exact purpose for this trip. The new king did not seem to be in a hurry as he stayed in each one of the cities for several weeks. By the time he made his way toward Redwater City, it was already midsummer. The increasing temperature did not decrease people's enthusiasm, however. Taverns were still full of voices talking about Roland's inauguration, main streets were decorated with colorful ribbons, houses over 2 stories near the palace were all leased out. The desolate old King's City seemed to have been restored its former glory. Perhaps only during such occasions the citizens in the city were reminded of the style and features a King's City should have. It had been over a year since Roland last stepped onto this piece of land. The moment he walked through the city gate, petals collected by the local girls covered the sky, cheers from the audience instantly ignited the city. They were not praising the new king's wisdom and benevolence, it was merely a habit of the people here. Nini and Pod were among them. The two of them happened to live in a tower building close to the main street, which offered them the best seats that overlooked the entire scene. Their parents were too busy serving potential tenants to stop them, enabling them to freely climb to the top of the tower, lie on the red brick roof, and watch the grand occasion of the army going into the city. Here they are. Is that His Majesty standing in the carriage? He looks so much younger than the second prince, Nini shouted with surprise. Wow, look. He's waving at us. Lord Timothy would never do that. He's waving at everyone in this direction. Pod shrugged. We climbed so high. There is no way for him to see us. We're also included in everyone, am I wrong? Nini said righteously. Judging by his appearance alone, he looks much nicer than the second prince. So the nice king hanged a big batch of nobles, including His Highness Timothy, his biological elder brother. The temporarily constructed gallows are still standing in the square. He must be the ruler who has killed the most people in the king's city, even if you include the rats. Hey, why do you always talk contrary to me? Nini glared at Pod. I don't like him, Pod said with a pouted mouth. He's never taken this city as his home. He advocates that in Western region, there are more working opportunities and encourages people to go there, but what about us? Nowadays the number of customers that come to Father's Tavern has reduced by half. Isn't he the one to blame? So who do you like? The second prince? I disliked him too. In order to catch witches, he caused turmoil over the entire city. The old king is the best, at least he wouldn't. God. Look at the girl next to His Majesty. Before Pod finished talking, Nini had put aside the topic they were discussing. Pointing at the carriage the king was standing on, she cried out, she's turning back. Oh God, she's so beautiful. Pod had no choice, but to sigh. Her discovery seemed to have attracted the crowd's attention. If one could ride on the carriage with the king, the significance of that person was self-evident. Discussions in the streets got hotter. Obviously, people were full of interests toward this strange yet pretty girl. Suddenly, Nini and Pod heard a clear, peculiar roar. Before they realized it, a gray figure, like an arrow shot from a bow, dashed in front of them and went directly into the tower building. Downstairs, a series of sounds followed as panic shouting, someone falling on the ground, and wine glasses smashing to pieces filled the air. What was that? Nini asked in surprise. I've no idea, but it seems it came from our home. Pod hurriedly stood up. Let's get back and take a look. Okay. They climbed down the brick wall, the same way as they went up, and hopped into the tavern from a window. To their surprise, several armored warriors were surrounding the guests. On the floor, there was sprayed alcohol, water, bowl and cup fragments, and a few feathers everywhere. The first thing that came into Nini's head was that Pod's complaint about His Majesty was overheard by somebody, and she wanted to muffle Pod's mouth, hide somewhere, and make no sound no matter what they saw. Yet she could not manage to do that. In actuality, when Nini and Pod came in from the window, the warriors had noticed these two uninvited guests. The warriors did not come to arrest them. Instead, they smiled at them. After a few minutes, the warriors went out one after another, leaving Pod's astonished parents and the guests behind. A man who seemed to be the head of the warriors even took out 10 silver royals and put them into Pod's father's hand. Waiting until the warriors all left, Nini hesitantly went to her parents and asked, "What happened?" It was unbelievable. Out of excitement, her father answered with exaggerated body gestures. When the king's honor guards passed by the street corner, a guest suddenly took out a loaded crossbow and aimed at the king. Nini could not help but gasp in astonishment. And then? We were frightened. If that arrow had been shot, all of us would have been in trouble. Luckily, at that moment, a person flew in and stopped that guy. A person? Not exactly. When she flew and she was a bird, but when she hit that guy on the head she became a person, a little girl about your age. A guest then said, we didn't come back to our normal selves until the crossbow fell to the floor. We went and tightly pinned down the assassin, then those warriors broke down the door. Are you sure about what you saw? Pod asked doubtfully. That bird, no, the person who can transform into a bird, where is she? Could it be that you secretly drank dreamland water and were hallucinating? By the time we had subdued the assassin, she had already left. Pod's father raised his palm and slapped at the back of Pod's head, which made Pod stagger. You dare doubt what I said? You're in for punishment. The crowd burst into laughter. The feathers attracted Nini's attention. They had similar colors to ordinary goshawk's feathers but were much whiter and softer. She carefully collected those feathers, pinned them to her head, and looked up and down at herself. She felt she could fly too. Her heart was full of satisfaction, thinking she could use them as a headpiece. This seemingly thrilling assassination did not draw much attention. Soon enough, people began to talk about the king and his followers. They were not aware of it, but at least 10 such incidents had already happened. Fortunately, with Sylvie on guard, all the individual assassinations that relied on luck ended up in failure. Furthermore, the patrol team silently caught most of the criminals before their plans could be carried out. Well done. While constantly waving towards the audience, Roland took a second to nod and said toward the carriage behind him, I didn't expect that there were still so many remnant factions left in the old King's City. It seems the situation isn't as stable as we imagined. My pleasure, Your Majesty, Sylvie replied. Since you knew it wasn't stable, you shouldn't have chosen to enter the city this way, Agatha said coldly, not sure whether it was age-related decision. Roland felt her temper had become more and more similar to Scroll when it came to the matter of security. Common people like you are too fragile. Sometimes an obscure wound can kill you, Agatha said. I'd stop any attack. Next to Agatha, Anna said calmly. Besides, Nana Pine is also among the security team. You are spoiling him. Ahem, Roland hurriedly cut in. In order to improve myself in the eyes of the people, such a risk is worth taking. After all, as a new king, I need to become acquainted with my subjects. In the carriage, there was Sylvie, Agatha, Isabella, Phyllis, and Zoe. Additionally, the elites of the First Army were in the surrounding area. Theoretically, such a powerful combination of guards could guarantee zero chance of an incident occurring. That's irrelevant. You could have chosen a safer way, such as standing on a platform in the palace and speaking to your subjects. Indeed, he did this for no other reason than to enjoy the fun of making an inspection tour. If he could, he'd prefer setting up 2 voice tubes in front of the carriage and greet his subjects with words like, hello, my people. Your Majesty, we're arriving at the palace, his guard said, which also had the effect of stopping Agatha from complaining anymore. Roland sighed in relief. Through the redecorated inner city gate, he saw a group of nearly 100 men standing respectfully, waiting for his arrival. Some of them were the Western region's old officials, such as Theo and Barev's disciples. Some were new officials who were originally surrendered small nobles, but most of them were newly enrolled scholars and civilians. Since the completion of the previous reform, the entire central region of Grey Castle was officially in his control. When the Eastern Front Army took over the Sewanshire region, Grey Castle would basically be an integrated kingdom. When the carriage stopped, Roland lifted his cloak in high spirit, got off the carriage step by step, and waved toward the audience behind him. Let's go. Follow me to the palace. Chapter 883, A New Generation of Officials. Respects to Your Majesty. Following the ceremonial officer Blanche Orlando's lead, all of the officials knelt down in unison such that they formed a low human wall along both sides of the palace. Respects to Your Majesty. Next to follow were the servants and maids who took charge of the palace's daily cleaning and routine matters. As Roland swept his eyes across the hall, he saw that everyone's heads were lowered, and their facial expressions were filled with both respect and fear. Respects to Your Majesty. Last to follow were the soldiers of the First Army, who knelt down behind him. Their voices were the loudest of the three groups, sounding almost like an unceasing succession of tidal waves. Roland had thought that he would be unmoved by such a scene, having observed numerous large crowds and spectacular military parades in his time. Yet, at the moment of experience, he realized that it was invariably heartwarming to be revered by so many people, no matter how many times it had happened before. As the crowd continued to cheer loudly, Roland walked up the steps toward the core area of the old king's city, the Holy Temple of Double Towers. After he had sat down firmly on the throne, the officials made their way into the hall one after another and arranged themselves in 3 rows in front of him. Roland could not help feeling a little emotional as he observed these nearly 100 people. The City of Dawn was indeed worthy of being the Kingdom of Greycastle's former center. It had taken only a year to recruit all of these officials, who were already equipped with literacy skills. Even more commendable was the fact that most of them were from humble backgrounds. This level of education was perhaps only rivaled by Neverwinter City. "Your Majesty, this is your scepter." Blanche respectfully handed him a shining gold staff. Exquisite patterns were engraved all over it, while a translucent blue sapphire was embedded on its tip. "It's forged by a goldsmith who specializes in making these things. Every king's scepter is furnished with its own unique features." Roland was normally uninterested in such meaningless symbols of power. He felt that people might get the impression that he was a young upstart if he acted overly unceremonious and rude. However, he quickly discovered that the artifact was not simply for display. After all, it was not easy to gather everyone's attention in such a large and spacious hall. And the scepter was the best tool for this purpose. He raised it up high before tapping it on the floor. With that, the crowd became quiet at once. "All of you know who I am already, so I shall skip the introduction." Roland scanned the entire hall and spoke at a slow pace. "My goals for this expedition are simple. The first is to eliminate threats, and the second is to put things back in order. My definition of threat isn't confined to military opponents, but includes anyone who hinders the implementation of the new policies, whether he be a noble, merchant, freeman or a rat. These people shall be dealt with no differently from rebels. To achieve the second goal, an administrative system similar to that of Neverwinter City will be put in place. By now, all of you should have heard that anyone who becomes a City Hall official shall receive generous rewards and benefits, while promotion won't be based on ancestry or family background. In other words, based on ability, a commoner can rise to the ranks of a minister or even the prime minister." A flurry of whispers and murmurs arose in the crowd at once. Before this announcement, even the minor nobles, let alone the commoners, could not imagine attaining such lofty positions even in their wildest dreams. The story of Berev, who rose from being a treasurer's apprentice to becoming a figure only second to His Majesty in power, was already well known in these parts. Everyone's eyes began to sear as they contemplated their chance of becoming a minister one day. Of course, not everyone will be admitted into the city hall. You'll need to pass the examination first. Roland continued calmly. The discussions grew even louder. "Your Majesty, what'll be tested?" someone from the crowd boldly asked. "Questions that seek out the individual's reliability. This is no different from that done in the Neverwinter City Hall," he explained with a smile. "A candidate shan't have to get every question right to pass, but there'll be a minimum score that has to be met. The specific contents of the examination shall be announced just prior to it." In truth, the question set was adapted from the 10 questions of loyalty compiled by Scroll, plus a few more questions concerning the candidate's work attitude and expectation. The main purpose of the test was to ensure the purity of the administrative team, albeit it was not called a loyalty test as that might scare off people who thought too much. During this era, disloyalty was considered a terrible sin and could take several forms. For example, insulting the monarchy in one's mind, or discussing the king's deeds and misdeeds over drunk conversation, were considered acts of disloyalty by law. Yet, which citizen had never complained in private before? Not to mention the nobles. If people knew that loyalty was being tested, many would certainly stay away from the examination. Of course, when the scale of recruitment expanded in the future, Nightingale would be unable to examine every candidate thoroughly. However, at this preliminary stage, Roland hoped that the dependability of the administration could be ensured as much as possible. After all, many of those hand-picked at this stage would eventually become stalwarts of the administration as long as they could adapt to the new system. Anyone who's recruited into the city hall will have to relinquish their businesses, he added. No official shall be allowed to have dealings with merchants, or they'll be heavily punished if caught. I hope that everyone will consider this point carefully. These words had the effect of a pail of cold water, and the hall became somewhat quieter at once. Unlike Border Town, most people in the old King's City held long-term jobs, and thus it was a difficult choice for them to forsake all that they had built up and commit to a new job. However, this was a necessary measure to promote the concept of professionalism. Perhaps, some people would simply hand their businesses to their distant relatives or hire other people to run their businesses for them, but nevertheless, it was important to maintain this policy on the surface at least. Roland fully knew that genuine officials did not exist in the Four Kingdoms. Ministerial appointments were granted to nobles whom the king trusted, and as such, working for him was viewed as a form of glory instead of duty. And when their glory was not under threat, they would consider their personal interests first. Through professionalization, the selected personnel would be bound to their jobs, and they would be held accountable for their department's success such that it would be impossible for them to seek fraudulent benefits. The only way for them to obtain more benefits would be through the increasing prosperity of the kingdom. By separating business and politics, it would also help to prevent situations where an individual was a competitor and an arbiter at the same time. My final point is, I shall personally record the name of every city hall official, regardless of his position. Seeing that the mood had dampened, Roland decided to throw out the sweetener he had long prepared. Your position, as well as the benefits it warrants, won't only be effective in this city. All territories under my rule shall recognize your authority. This was the biggest draw of a professional bureaucracy. The significance of becoming a bureaucrat was self-evident. It was not only a form of recognition but also offered the greatest security. Though the people in the hall might not be aware of its entire scope of benefits at the moment, they would understand the wonderful taste of eating national food over time. As the old King's City had already been through several screenings, the noble class had all but disappeared, and thus the city was much easier to reorganize than the previous few cities. Many people retained doubts about the proposed plan, but nobody came forth to openly oppose it, while many more were willing to give the examination a go. A long queue quickly formed at the registration area after the convention ended. Roland returned to his study and was about to invite Theo, Yorko, and other old pals over for a private chat when a guard hurriedly entered the room. Your Majesty, we've just received a report from the unit stationed in the northern region. They've caught sight of the Kingdom of Dawn's army to the west of Hermes. Chapter 884, The Impact of War. How's the situation in the west? As soon as Nail and Uncle Sang entered the central tent, Eagle Face, the commander of the garrison in the northern region, inquired about the state of the war. They're still increasing. The veteran administered a military salute and briefly reported the findings of his observation over the past week. I was indeed surprised. I never thought there'd be such a great force in the Kingdom of Dawn. How many of them? Eagle Face poured 2 cups of tea for them, looking completely unperturbed. 8,000? 9,000? I'm afraid it's over 10,000. Uncle Sang drained the cup. There's a nearly 1-mile stretch of encampments, along with more than 20 banners whose names I can't tell. I have no idea where they've found so many people that are willing to cast their lives away. Over 10,000? Eagle Face stopped his writing. Ask the unit leader if you don't believe me. Uncle Sang pointed to Nail next to him. In order to get an estimate of their number, we went very close to the old holy city under the risk of being discovered. The entire suburb is filled with troops commanded by the nobles from the Kingdom of Dawn. They've blocked the path that connects Hermes and the kingdom. Most refugees have retreated toward the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter. I bet they've also deployed forces at Coldwind Ridge as well. At least, I've seen several detachments of more than 100 people on the way back. That's true, Nail added with a nod. On the part of the Kingdom of Dawn, they're now waiting for the rest of their troops to get there whilst enhancing their defense of the surrounding areas. I suggest that our scout team not get too close to the old holy city in the future, lest they're discovered by their patrolling knights. Ever since they had noticed the unusual situation in Hermes, the garrison in the northern region had started to slowly proceed to the plateau area with the assistance of Duke Kant, not only to gather more intelligence but also to prepare for the upcoming battle. However, His Majesty did not approve Eagle Face's probing and attacking plan, only asking him to instead stay alert and continue to scout. With morbid disappointment, instead of waging a great war, the deputy battalion commander instead picked some capable soldiers from the garrison, instructing them to disguise as refugees to monitor both the new and the old holy cities in a rotation. In the meantime, he continued to update Neverwinter on the progress of the investigation. Nevertheless, Eagle Face had still made a few accomplishments over the past few months. After he had confirmed that the deployment of corps in the Holy City was not a trap, the garrison in the northern region had retrieved Coldwind Ridge. As for the army of the Kingdom of Dawn, they had only appeared 2 to 3 weeks ago. Sir, do you fear that those people will impede His Majesty's plan? Ha ha ha, how is it possible? Eagle Face burst into laughter. Even if their number doubles, they're no more than some waddling targets. Even the God's Punishment Army failed to break the defensive line under the bombardment of machine guns. How can they possibly approach His Majesty? I'm actually happy to see they have tons of people. Let them attack the city wall of the Holy City first so that they'll know how fortified the church is. I really hope that the fight would bleed off strength from both of them. By then, I'm sure His Majesty will agree to my proposal. Eagle Face paused for a few seconds and then said, "Good job, scouts. You can take a rest now." "Yes, sir." Uncle Sang saluted. Nail, however, did not leave immediately. After a moment of hesitation, he asked, "Can't we beat them off now?" Both Eagle Face and Uncle Sang were stunned. "What? His Majesty doesn't allow us to attack Hermes on our own, but it doesn't mean he doesn't let us fight against the army of the Kingdom of Dawn." Nail bit his lip. "If we wait until they launch an attack on the Holy City, the villages at the foot of Mountain Hermes may have already been razed to the ground." The veteran sighed. "Did you see something?" Eagle Face frowned. "Pillage and massacre." Nail clapped his hand over his forehead, reluctant to revisit the intense and inhumane scene. "They didn't enter the old holy city but simply encamped outside. Soldiers have mounted nearby residents on sharpened wooden stakes and used them as the parapet of the battalion. They treat women even worse." "Enough." Eagle Face interrupted him. "This is common in a war. Both the Church and the Kingdom of Dawn are His Majesty's enemies. It's better for the enemies to consume each other than we doing it for them. Also, don't forget we're soldiers, the swords of His Majesty. It's our duty to kill." "But that's different." Nail persisted. "We fight to help His Majesty achieve his goal, but they kill just for the sake of killing. Those villagers aren't believers, but they're treated worse than animals." "Sir, Nail is just overreacting a little." Seeing Eagle Face's face cloud over, Uncle Sang explained immediately. He then turned to Nail and reproached. "Seriously? Do you know what you're talking about? As long as the church is still there, we can't cross the Hermes Plateau. How can we stop the army of the Kingdom of Dawn if the church is in our way?" The new holy city, which functioned as a great stronghold, connected all the flat areas of the plateau together. The 4 city gates in the outer part of the city were facing the 4 paths leading to the 4 kingdoms. Although the gates, currently unguarded, were accessible to refugees, it did not mean the church would allow the First Army to drive straight in, past the holy city, and enter the territory of the Kingdom of Dawn without any resistance. Nail certainly knew that. He took a deep breath and said, "Actually, there's an alternative pathway." "A pathway?" "I talked to some of the refugees on my way back. One of them told me that there's a path wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast in the steep cliffs on the outer side of the plateau. The road will be blocked by snow and ice in winter. However, when the snow melts, the path is again accessible, and you can directly cross Hermes without intruding upon the holy city. Eagle Face gazed at him for quite a while and shook his head. Forget about it. Nail dropped his head and fell silent. You also know very well that this isn't a reliable plan. No, it's an unachievable plan, I should say. The deputy battalion commander was surprisingly patient. First of all, it's questionable whether this passageway exists or not. Also, even if it does, and it successfully leads us to the old holy city, we can't defeat a force of 10,000 people at once. His Majesty said very clearly during the night session that logistics always comes first before any operation. It would be hard to transport supplies on a path only wide enough for 2 people, not to mention machine guns and ammunition. Besides, there are only 500 people stationed in the northern region. The ammunition we're currently equipped with isn't enough to conduct a prolonged war. Once we're routed, we'll be defenseless. It's likely that the whole army would be wiped out. Eagle Face rose to his feet and walked up to Nail. I want to fight a battle of annihilation more than you do, but that's just my personal opinion. As His Majesty and Sir Iron Axe have entrusted the army to me, I have the obligation to first think about the issue of safety and seek the best interests of the army when it comes to decision-making, whether it's regarding the current decision or the previous one with respect to the refugee settlement. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Nail clenched his fist but at length performed a military salute. Off you go. When the two were about to retire, a soldier lifted the curtain and entered. Sir, a reply from His Majesty. Really? Give it to me. Eagle Face unfolded the encrypted letter in a haste. No sooner had Nail and Uncle Sang left the tent did he stop them. Wait a minute. His Majesty has new instructions? The veteran asked. Yes. The First Army has set off from King City by boat and is now heading to the northern region at full speed. They'll be arriving at Coldwind Ridge in about 10 days. That'll be too late, after 10 days. Nail lamented within himself. The army of the Kingdom of Dawn could reach the old holy city anytime and turn the villages at the foot of Mount Hermes into an earthly hell within a couple of days. For a moment, he seemed to see the lady who had struggled under musket fire again, denouncing what he had done. Before their arrival, His Majesty wants us to take action immediately to prevent the army of the Kingdom of Dawn from entering the old holy city. At least, we have to prevent them plundering the monastery. Nail raised his head abruptly. Can we manage that? Uncle Sang scratched the back of his head. It's going to be very hard. That's why His Majesty has dispatched special reinforcements who will arrive in the northern region tomorrow night. Eagle Face closed the encrypted letter. Only the witches can get here that fast. He then turned to the 2 men. Call a meeting with all the unit leaders. By the way, what's the name of the refugee who knows the secret pathway? Chapter 885, The Unlucky Tradesman. Tanjin thought himself very unfortunate. He was merely an ordinary tradesman who traveled between the city of Evernight and Hermes, selling furs and flannels produced in Grey Castle to the church and bringing amulets or sculptures dipped in the holy water back to Grey Castle. It had taken him nearly 10 years to finally establish himself and survive the fierce competition among his peers. Tanjin had decided to use the extra money he had to expand his business. Therefore, he had purchased a residence with an additional warehouse at the skirt of the new holy city to store his inventory. When he had been about to launch his business, however, the situation in the north had suddenly taken a turn for the worse. A great conflict between the new king of Grey Castle and the church had broken out, which had resulted in a rapid decrease in the need for tokens of faith like amulets. As a consequence, he had not profited anything from the sale and instead had suffered a loss of around 20%. Nevertheless, Tanjin believed he could still earn something by selling furs. As the tension between the church and the king increased, the price of furs actually went up. At that time, he had firmly believed that the church would gain the eventual victory. As a frequent visitor to the holy city, Tanjin knew how fortified the church was. Even the most skillful knight in the kingdom might not be able to compete against a judgment warrior, who was subject to the most intense training in Hermes. However, to his dismay, the church was defeated and it was a miserable defeat. His business had thus totally failed. Although he had reduced the price by 30%, nobody made a purchase. It was only until the holy city had descended into a state of chaos and that his inventory had been stolen that Cheng Yan had finally realized that the holy city was no longer safe. In fact, he had had an ominous feeling ever since the collapse of the cathedral. However, unwilling to abandon his entire business that he had developed and been working on for so many years, he had taken a chance to stay. The arrival of the army of the Kingdom of Dawn at the foot of the mountain Hermes, unfortunately, was the last straw. It was obvious that those soldiers had come here for the wealth that the church had accumulated for centuries. Cheng Yan was sure that with intense avarice, those soldiers would have not only have robbed his furs but also taken his life if he continued to linger. After making the difficult decision with a flash of determination, Cheng Yan had headed to the south with many other merchants. Through toils and snares, they had, in the end, arrived at Grey Castle a few days later. They were treated fairly by the garrison troops at the border, asked some simple questions by the soldiers, and taken to a campground specifically for refugees. Afterwards, they were told that a fleet sent by the Duke of the Northern region would take them back to the city in 2 days. Although his life work had been cast to the wind, Cheng Yan was much more fortunate than his rival miser Sokas, who had died on the way. After all, he was alive and still had a place to live in the city of Evernight, where his wife and children were waiting for him. At this thought, Cheng Yan felt much better and thought all his misfortunes had finally come to an end. But his heart soon sank when 2 soldiers sent by the new king found him and took him out of the campsite. He tried to bribe the pair for some information with a few silver royals but failed miserably. "Do they want to take advantage of me when I'm most helpless and strip all my money?" Cheng Yan clasped his money pouch over his chest. This was the last bit he had. If he lost it, he would not be able to survive. Yet he was too scared to refuse these soldiers' request, for he was certainly not strong enough to resist the ferocious army that had even crushed the church. If he infuriated these monsters, he would probably suffer a more painful death. Cheng Yan wailed in silence as he walked. "Why am I the misfortunate one? Why did they pick me rather than anyone else? Am I now cursed by the gods because I dumped all the overstocked amulets and sculptures into the ditch?" Filled with the bitterest sensations of despondence and lamentation, he did not hear the question posed by the deputy battalion commander until a moment later. What, pathway? The deputy commander did not fly into a rage but repeated his question patiently. "One of my soldiers told me that you know a pathway that would allow us to take a detour around the new holy city and directly reach the foot of Mountain Hermes. Is it true? The one you told me about. You said some tradesmen often use that pathway to smuggle valuable goods. You did it a few times with them as well." Another person put in. "Hold on. So they aren't coming for my gold royals?" Cheng Yan stole a glance at the person and found it was the young soldier he had met on his way. He remembered his name was Nail. Since Nail looked like a pretty nice guy, Cheng Yan had had a little chat with him and had also attempted to impress Nail by disclosing that he had once evaded sales taxes imposed by the church by using the pathway. He never expected that it would bring him such trouble. But there was no point regretting it now. "Well, there's indeed a pathway. The locals call it Cloud Ladder." Cheng Yan forced an answer. "But it only appears after the snow melts, and it becomes inaccessible when it's rainy or foggy. It's rumored that the pathway leads to different directions, but I only know the one to the Kingdom of Dawn." "Very well." The commander nodded. "You show my men the way. If they successfully reach the foot of Mountain Hermes, I'll reward you for your service." "Mercy, sir." Cheng Yan went to his knees immediately. "I don't want a reward but just to go home after it's done." "Unfortunately you can't." The commander's reply sent a chill down his spine. "To make sure everything goes smoothly, you must stay with us for the next few days until we no longer need you." But sir," before Cheng Yan could finish his sentence, the commander tossed him 5 gold royals. "This is the deposit. There'll be another 5 after the mission is completed." The commander interrupted him. You should know very well what 10 gold royals can afford in most parts of Grey Castle. Tanjin swallowed hard. 10 gold royals could afford a life. After doing business for so many years, his entire cash flow was merely a little over 30 gold royals. It was obvious that the commander intended to buy out his life with 10 gold royals, and there was no ground for him to negotiate. Will you really let me go? Although Tanjin already knew the answer, he still asked. Naturally. As long as you work hard as a guide, I assure you that you'll be escorted to the city of Evernight. Tanjin left the campground apprehensively and found the 2 soldiers who accompanied him were the young man named Nail and an elder soldier. You really cooked my goose. Tanjin smiled dryly. From the look of the 2 people, Tanjin learned that it was simply a coincidence rather than a deliberate frame-up. How is it possible? Nail knitted his brows. 10 gold royals isn't a small amount. As long as you act with utmost good faith, you don't need to worry about running into any dangers. Rest assured. Our commander is a man of his word. If he says you can go, you definitely will. The elder soldier put in. Plus, 10 gold royals for just showing the way? I'd be more than happy to do that. Sir, you're. Just call me Uncle Sang. You don't need to address me with such formality. If you really insist, do it to Nail. He's the unit leader, my superior. Oh really? Tanjin looked a little embarrassed. He had thought the young man was just a soldier of the lowest military rank. Just Nail. Nail waved his hand casually. Can either of you tell me what the mission your deputy battalion commander referred to exactly is? We have to go around the Hermes Plateau and stop the army of the Kingdom of Dawn at the Old Holy City. Unit leader. Uncle Sang reminded Nail. It's okay. He'll stay with us in the next couple of days. Plus, he won't go making any random and blind conjectures if he's informed of a little bit. This will help us complete our mission. Besides, I'll shoot him down immediately if I find him plotting something. Tanjin shivered at Nail's words, but his attention was drawn to the former half of the speech, which sounded even more inconceivable. To stop the army of the Kingdom of Dawn? Tanjin's eyes were wide open. That's impossible. The pathway is scarcely wide enough for 2 men to walk abreast, and some parts of the road have collapsed. One misstep you'll fall off the cliff. Even if you walk from dawn to dusk, you can only transfer several hundred people in a week. How are you supposed to fight against those knights? It's also probable that the church will attack you from behind. We aren't fighting alone, Nail answered placidly. His Majesty's reinforcement will be arriving at Coldwind Ridge soon. You'll see just how the First Army does battle. Chapter 886, Weapons and Arts. Translator, Transen Editor, Transen. Reinforcements? Did he understand what he was saying? Tanjin thought to himself while twitching his lips. It would be useless if the reinforcements could not cross the pathway. Or did he mean reinforcements that could instantly pulverize Hermes to the ground and stride across the ruin of the Holy City? If that were the case, they would need at least a dozen days to get prepared for the strike. Noticing that Nail did not have any intention of speaking more on the matter, Tanjin decided to drop the topic. One of the entrances to Cloud Ladder was on a cliff, not far away from Coldwind Ridge. They entered from a cave that was barely visible from the outside. When they could see the sky above their heads again, they found themselves seemingly in midair. The air was wet with clouds and fog filling the road. They suddenly understood why this passage was called Cloud Ladder, as they felt like they were climbing to heaven. Despite the dangerous road, as long as the weather was good, the path was reliable. Tanjin had exaggerated how unsafe Cloud Ladder was, to prevent the First Army from going there. He didn't tell Nail that a couple of merchants reinforced the stability of the cave and strengthened the road with planks and wedges so that they could continuously use the pathway to evade taxes. As a result, the rumors of the dangerous road were false. Within half a day, Tanjin had led Nail and his men up and down the path 3 times. Without any mountain roads or passes set up by the Holy City, the pathway had shortened the distance considerably. It was more efficient for light infantry to travel via the path than via the main road. Tanjin noticed that Nail was repeatedly making notes in a small book. Apart from the everyday language widely used throughout the continent, there were also some unfamiliar symbols he had never seen. Tanjin was surprised that a soldier could not only read and write but also had knowledge he couldn't understand. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he probably wouldn't have believed it. Tanjin had joined a chamber of commerce to learn bookkeeping and how to record transactions. He had spent a whole gold royal dedicated to just his primary business education. Tanjin did not understand that if Nail could read and write, why he had still selected such a high-risk career, working as a soldier and putting his life on the line. Although Roland Wimbledon's army was impressive, there was no war without death. Nobody could guarantee that he was not the next. However, during their conversation, Tanjin learned that reading, writing and map drawing were not considered advanced skills. It appeared that every member of the First Army possessed such skills. What are they all thinking? Tanjin was even more confused. By the time they returned to the campsite, it was almost nightfall. There was quite a buzz around the tent. Tanjin saw a group of soldiers excitedly discussing something. All their eyes were locked on the bonfire in the center of the campground. It seems that the reinforcements are here. Nail grinned. I think so, too. Uncle Sang smiled. I wonder which familiar faces we will see this time. Miss Lightning and Miss Maggie must be among them. The unit leader accelerated his paces. Let's go take a look. What? Miss? The reinforcements they'd been waiting for were women? Tanjin followed at their heels. He picked an open space, stood on his tiptoes, and looked in the direction of the crowd. Upon seeing the reinforcements, he felt like he was going to pass out. What the hell? They're the reinforcements? These are just a bunch of kids. Especially the one whose hair nearly reached the ground. Judging from the kid's round face and bright, sparkling eyes, Tanjin thought she couldn't be more than 10 years old. The others were only a bit older. They all looked frail and tiny, whose legs and arms were not even as thick as Tanjin's fist. He thought they would not be of any use on the battlefield, for they probably couldn't raise a sword. This is ridiculous. Wait, Tanjin paused for a second and suddenly became a little uncertain. One of the reasons for his uncertainty was the physical appearances of those girls. They looked much prettier than ordinary women. Tanjin had not noticed their unique beauty at first, but when a group of them stuck together, he immediately came to realize that they were probably witches. Witches were not as horrible as people thought them to be. If it were true that they were as powerful as demons from hell, they would have destroyed the church and the worldly kingdoms long before. As an experienced, well-informed tradesman, Tanjin knew that with a god's punishment stone, even a knight could easily kill several witches at a time. Witches weren't stronger than ordinary people when their power was rendered useless. But everything became trickier when another person's influence was factored in. Tanjin held his breath and rested his eyes on another green-haired lady. He had seen her once, at the celebration ceremony in the city of Evernight. Although she was not the most beautiful girl among the group, she was more attractive than anybody else he had seen at the celebration. Nobody would ever forget an elegant lady with such a strong and distinctive character. It was Edith Kant, the daughter of the Duke of the city of Evernight, who was also known as the Pearl of the Northern Region. She could be charming and enchanted in daily life but also valiant and fearless enough to behead her enemies on the battlefield with her long sword. It was rumored that her skill in fencing was as stunning as her appearance. What people feared most, however, was her unpredictable and even slightly eccentric work style. All the people who had once scorned her had paid a steep price for their insolence. When it came to anecdotes regarding the Pearl of the Northern Region, the residents in the city of Evernight could ramble on and on for several nights. It appeared that Duke Kant had sided entirely with the new king, otherwise, he would never allow his beloved daughter to come to the barracks alone, unguarded. Further, from the respectful attitude with which the deputy battalion commander treated Edith, Tanjin judged that she would not disgrace her title Pearl even if she were out of the northern region. The new king's army was so powerful that they could even defeat the church. Combining the assistance of the witches and Edith Kant with his invincible army, the new king would probably cause great trouble for the Kingdom of Dawn's army. Apart from the reinforcements, Tanjin was also intrigued by something else. He saw a strange-looking iron frame next to the bonfire. The symmetrical structure looked like a shoulder pole at first glance, with one basket attached to either end of the pole, each containing 4 rows of metal cylinders. All the cylinders had pointy tails and fat heads. Tanjin could not immediately figure out what they were made of. He somehow felt a little disturbed at the sight of the metal objects. After studying them for quite a while, Tanjin finally understood from where his anxious feeling came. The 9 cylinders, which were as tall as a full-grown man, were almost identical. From their fat heads to their pointy tails, all of them had the same smooth curve. This discovery made his hands sweat. Tanjin knew that as the hardest material in the world, metals needed to be repeatedly smelted and hammered before being beaten into shape. All the blacksmiths he knew had told him that it required a great amount of skill to forge nicely shaped, smooth-surfaced ironware. What a fantastic technique it is to be able to shape a 5-foot iron shard into a smooth curve. And to use that same technique to make 9 replicates? If he told this story to any of the blacksmiths in the city of Neverwinter, they would mock him for his ignorance. It would be more understandable if all 9 cylinders were refined art pieces, but surprisingly they were not. Tanjin knew from their grayish color and the sloppy way they were stored that these cylinders were not expensive, delicate pieces of art. They were likely some unique weapon since they had been transported here to the barracks by the reinforcements. Nevertheless, these sturdy and durable weapons somehow gave a particular aesthetic pleasure as if they were pieces of art. The intense shock brought by this sheer contrast was unprecedented and indescribable. Tanjin swallowed hard and realized that he probably could not label himself as well-informed anymore. For these people, war seemed to have become something else. A realm beyond his imagination. Chapter 887, Bomber Action. At this time, in a big tent located at the center of the Northern Region Garrison's camping ground, everyone was busy preparing for the upcoming battle. Eagle Face was astonished by Edith's plan. Leave the entire front to the witches? I trust their abilities, but there are at least 10,000 people in the army of the Kingdom of Dawn and many of them were God's stones of retaliation. If the witches fell into a bitter fight there, it'll be hard for us to save them. Those were my initial thoughts of this plan. Edith smiled. In fact, it's not the advisor department's plan but His Majesty's idea. Do you have a formal record of this? Asked the deputy battalion commander. Here you are. The Pearl of the Northern Region gave him a confidential letter marked with a red seal. By the way, you can see that in the last part of the letter, the king has temporarily given me the power of commander. In accordance with the rules of the First Army, any pre-war combat strategy must have a paper record which should be audited and signed by officers at a corresponding level, and a plan signed by His Majesty himself must be unconditionally executed. After confirming the validity of the signature, Eagle Face promptly stood straight and made a military salute. The Northern Region Garrison promises to fulfill the mission. Good. Edith smiled. But remember, your purpose is to give the enemy a destructive blow when they retreat in disorder. Please note the prerequisite. If they're not fleeing hurriedly, you should consider it a sign of failure and backtrack to Cloud Ladder. No unauthorized military action is allowed. You must clearly explain this order to every solider. Backtrack? Do you mean, retreat? Eagle Face was stunned. Isn't His Majesty sure about whether this plan is feasible? We've never tried this before, so who knows? If it doesn't work, we must consider other strategies. That's why His Majesty sent me here. The Pearl of the Northern Region said straightforwardly. What about the witches? They won't be in any danger even if they fail. Got it. I'll go prepare for this task. Our troops will set out tomorrow morning. Eagle Face saluted again. This operation is named Bomber Action and once your troops are in place, the battle will begin. Edith made a military salute to him. Well, go. Yes. Although Eagle Face did not really know what bomber meant, he had faith in this thing. He was firmly convinced that all the king's new inventions were extraordinary, just like the steam engine. After 2 days of waiting in the camp, Lightning finally received the order to take action. Sylvie's voice came through a sigil of listening in her hand. Margie has transported all the people into place. You can set off now. The Kingdom of Dawn's soldiers have taken down their tents and packed. They are beginning to form up for battle. Hope you can catch up with them. Don't worry. We'll be there soon. With these words, the little girl turned back and waved to Maggie and Hummingbird. Come on. It's time to go. In the past 2 days, she had flown in the sky to check the map of Cloud Ladder and survey the situation of all the surrounding areas. His Majesty's plan was not complicated. The 6 witches were divided into 2 teams. One was in charge of transportation and logistics and thus mainly relied on Margie's magic arc to complete their task. Sylvie and Lily were also in this group. The former was able to detect distant enemies to ensure that they could seize the initiative on the battlefield. The latter could prevent the church's demonic plague in case the church got desperate and spread it to kill the Kingdom of Dawn's soldiers who broke into the old holy city. The other team was the heart of this military operation. Oh. Cool. Hummingbird sat in the bomb carrier and held the connecting rods on both sides of her seat. She made her magic power constantly circulate throughout this iron structure which Roland named the East Wind. Soon, the weight of this bomb carrier and the 8 bombs it carried was reduced by 99% and was just within Maggie's carrying capacity. The white-haired girl transformed herself into a big beast and leaned over the bomb carrier. Lightning went to tie the cloth straps and ropes, binding Maggie and the East Wind together. As Hummingbird's ability could not affect on the living things, Maggie was actually carrying a witch and the East Wind which was now as light as the witch. As long as Hummingbird could maintain the weight-reducing effect, Maggie would be able to perform precision strike missions for a long time. Roland had used the hydrogen balloon to bomb the King City and had achieved remarkable success. Based on the post-war reports of that attack, he had made a few improvements. Maggie's role in this mission was to replace the balloon since she flew faster and moved much more flexibly. More importantly, she could swoop before dropping bombs, which would save Lightning the trouble of revising the direction and allowed her to focus on detection and navigation. Limited by her magic power, Hummingbird was unable to sustain the weight-reducing effect for the East Wind throughout the day. Though her power had increased a lot since she had started to practice carrying cannons, she could only manage to lift these bulky, heavy bombs for half a day at most. After all, most of the time, the bomb shells, warheads, and ammunition were transported separately. Fortunately, the Kingdom of Dawn's army was not far away. Half a day was enough. The road is clear. You can take off. Repeat, you can take off. Lightning put on her goggles and leaped up into the air. Ah, it's coming again. Hummingbird sighed. Ow ow ow. Maggie, now in the form of a giant flying beast, flapped her broad wings and took off, casting a huge shadow on the ground. The tents in the camp had begun to shake due to the airflow caused by her wings, which was as strong as a howling gale. She adjusted her direction and headed for the Hermes Mountain. An hour later, the 3 witches were in the sky above the old holy city and easily spotted their target, an army of over 10,000 people. As seen from above, this army resembled a stream outside the city, but inside it, the soldiers dispersed. They seemed like colorful ants creeping around slowly and nibbling the old holy city's territory away. Lightning did not like the church at all and felt no pity seeing it suffer from this plundering. However, she also knew that countless people inside the city were innocent, especially those orphans who had been taken to the monastery by the church. She thought they should not be buried here together with the old holy city. The little girl inhaled deeply and kept descending until she felt some breathing difficulty. She opened her arms and dived along the middle of the stream of people, moving in the opposite direction to the army of the Kingdom of Dawn. This sharp descent made her feel as if all her internal organs were moving backwards. It was not a pleasant feeling, but she was still thrilled by the high speed. She did not look back, for she was sure that Maggie must have been closely following her. After spending these years together, they could cooperate flawlessly. The people and things on the ground rapidly became clearer, and some knights apparently also noticed the shadow falling from the sky. She could even see the scared looks on their faces. When the girl and the beast flew down to the middle part of the stream of people, the girl suddenly flew up while shouting, "Now, drop the bombs!" Hummingbird, who was sitting in the bomb carrier, immediately pulled the switch. Chapter 888, Heavenly Divine Retribution. With a clicking sound, the bolt loosened. 2 bombs, each as heavy as Nightingale, slid out of the bomb carrier and fell toward the crowd due to their inertia. After leaving the east wind, the bombs instantly regained their weight while maintaining their high speed. This change gave them great momentum. As they sailed through the air, they made a friction sound which was like a strange whistle or the howling sound made by a gust of wind blowing through a cave. People on the ground simultaneously looked up at this incredible scene. At this moment, the nobles of the Kingdom of Dawn felt relieved. They thought these 2 things falling from the sky were nothing compared to the big flying monster. In their view, though these things dropping from that height were able to crush anything they hit on the ground, they could, at most, kill 3 or 4 unlucky guys. They believed this would not be a problem for such a large army. Hearing Appin's call for an expedition to the west, both great nobles such as dukes and lesser nobles like the new knights had been actively preparing their horses and eagerly recruited servants. Numerous people joined this expedition, hoping to get a share of the profits from the church that was already on the verge of collapsing. Having an army of over 10,000 people, the nobles would not care at all if several guys or even 30 to 40 people got killed by the things falling from the sky. They still thought of the formidable devil beast as a genuine threat. Once it dived into the crowd to bite and stomp, it would easily slaughter over 100 people, let alone the casualties and loss that would occur when the panicked serfs began to run away. Given that, they firmly believed that as long as the monster did not land, they did not need to worry too much. They also reckoned that the enemies in the sky, who were probably witches, did not have enough courage to openly fight against the army of the Kingdom of Dawn. Since they came here to rob the church of its treasures, all the nobles of the Kingdom of Dawn wore god stones of retaliation and brought many weapons specially made to fight witches. At this moment, many knights put down their longbows and magic stone arrows and bet with each other on whose soldiers would be hit by the black stones. No one on the ground moved out of position. No one lied down to cover themselves from the coming explosion. They just watched the 2 bombs flying towards them like 2 arrows and kept advancing steadily. A moment later, 2 scarlet flames broke out in the middle of the stream of people. People within the bomb's landing zones were instantly turned to ash. The heated air rapidly expanded, forming hot, strong blast. Everyone that bumped into it felt as if they had hit a steel wall and quickly got blown to smithereens. Soon, broken limbs and internal organs were littered everywhere. The blast quickly died down and could not tear apart people that were 100 steps away from the center of impact. But this explosion was not the only destructive thing. The Kingdom of Dawn's troops could hardly find any shelter, since unlike the King's City, this area connecting the Kingdom of Dawn and the Old Holy City was a vast and open plain. When the bombs exploded, the defenseless people became easy targets for the explosion waves, debris and numerous iron balls shot out of the shells. They traveled through the crowd at a speed several times faster than that of the sound. Each iron ball could pierce through a dozen of people before it stopped, and the steel shell fragments were even more destructive. Due to the terrain advantage, the bombs caused damage over a wide area. The witches in the sky saw the black smoke rise in a flash and form something like a high wall, which choked off the movement of the stream of people on the ground. Before the nobles of the Kingdom of Dawn recovered from the shock, lightning had already ascended to the highest point possible, ready for the second round of diving. The east wind launched the second attack. Maggie immediately closed her wings and followed closely behind the little girl, falling all the way from the sky with a loud howl. Ow ow ow. They had loaded 4 bombs on each side of the bomb carrier, so they could choose to carry out 4 bombing raids or drop all 8 bombs at once. In order to achieve the best effect, Lightning intended to dive 4 times to throw bombs into the middle and the rear parts of the stream of people. Beyond her expectations, during the 3rd round of attack, the army of the Kingdom of Dawn totally collapsed. For those who were still alive, these explosions were more like divine retribution coming from heaven. Places struck by God's thunder were all scorched and littered with corpses. Neither the serfs without protective clothing nor the fully armored knights could escape from these hellish, raging flames. This seemingly endless catastrophe made them feel desperate, and the deafening explosion noises and screams of the seriously wounded crushed their spirit. The biggest crisis for them was that in this inconceivable series of attacks, they could do nothing except praying that the black stones would not land near them. They had no chance of hurting the giant flying monster either, since it kept hovering or swooping beyond the range of their arrows. This kind of battle was totally beyond their understanding. The nobles came for the wealth, but never wanted to risk their own lives in the process. No matter how much money they got from this city, they would not be able to enjoy it if they died here. They could not even carry the wealth back home if all their servants got killed in this attack. With this thought in mind, they made a swift decision to escape. Seeing the nobles, who had strictly prohibited the serfs from running away, turn their steeds to flee the battlefield one after another, the whole army quickly slid into chaos. As more and more people joined the fleeing knights, the stream of people started to move again, but this time, it was heading in the opposite direction. The people outside the city that had marched orderly in the beginning now stopped entering the city and started to escape in disorder. The nightmare for the army of the Kingdom of Dawn began at this moment. When they swarmed to the main road, the First Army soldiers hiding in the fields on one side of the road calmly pulled their triggers. This was a typical flank attack. The panicked nobles just wanted to leave this dangerous place as soon as possible and completely forgot about detecting enemies and protecting their flanks. 5 squads of the northern region's garrison lined up along the road and shot the soldiers of the Kingdom of Dawn with revolving rifles and heavy machine guns. As their targets were within 300 meters, they did not even need to think about accuracy. They just kept firing, trying to shoot out all the bullets in their guns as quickly as possible. Before sunrise, Eagleface's troops had already hidden themselves away in the fields where the wheat straws were waist-high. With the help of Sylvie, they could hide here without being spotted by the enemy's scouts and remain informed about the enemy's movements. Obviously, there was a huge gap in information gathering technology between the two factions. Crack! The moment the first shot rang out, the nobles of the Kingdom of Dawn were astonished to find that they were ambushed by some enemy forces hiding in the fields. If this had happened when they had been marching toward the city, they would have concentrated their forces to fight back. However, now the situation was totally out of control. The soldiers of the Kingdom of Dawn were hurriedly running for their lives and wishing that they could grow extra legs to rapidly move as far away from the bullets as possible. The nobles sent their mounts rampaging through the crowd, squandering their subjects' lives. The wide road turned into an avenue of death. Chapter 889, A Key Person. Tanjin, who had been compelled to follow the First Army, found that he had seriously underestimated this army's strength. During the battle, they never fought in hand-to-hand combat against the army of the Kingdom of Dawn, and Tanjin did not see a shower of arrows nor any brutal fighting scenes in this 500-meter-long front. The First Army soldiers just kept firing at their enemies, and the people in the army of the Kingdom of Dawn kept falling down at the sound of the guns. This scene seemed like a flashy show to him. But the loud, shrill cries from the main road reminded him that it was an extremely fierce battle. This easy victory of the First Army clearly demonstrated its strength to him. He finally understood the combat method of the First Army that Nail mentioned. He had never seen such an well-organized, disciplined army in the past and thought that the First Army soldiers were as outstanding as their lethal weapons. In this army, hundreds of soldiers acted in unison as if they were one person. They moved quietly in the darkness to get into position and got ready for the ambush before daybreak. They silently lurked and launched an attack according to their plan. Even with no supervisor overseeing the fight, the 5 squads still worked closely together. The commander, Eagle Face, also came to join the ambush rather than staying in the camp. Every soldier was highly concentrated and attentive to his duty. Each order was promptly executed. He believed that if it had not been for these excellent soldiers, the First Army would have not been able to achieve such great success solely relying on their fierce weapons. After witnessing the battle, Tanjin could not help but feel glad that he had chosen to leave Hermes in time. He thought that if he had stayed in the Holy City, a merchant like him probably would have been accused of financing the enemy when the first army seized the city. He secretly sighed. Well, it's really dangerous to do business in the outside world. If I can return home safely this time, I'll never leave the city of Evernight in the future. I can carry on business within the city. Although I won't earn much money that way, I'll still be able to raise my family. And my Fu are in the paradise on earth. She must miss me very much. I really had hoped to get home earlier. Tanjin was absorbed in thought. Towards the evening, Eagle Face stepped into a temporary tent for a meeting. He saluted Edith and handed a report to her. The battlefield has been basically cleaned up. Here are the reports from each squad. I briefly summarized them. Thank you for your hard work. The Pearl of the Northern Region received the report and roughly glanced through it. Just as she had expected, the casualty figure for the first army was 0. As for the army of the Kingdom of Dawn, more than 1,000 people were found dead and about 600 were wounded. This fight was estimated to reduce the number of Dawn's soldiers by 20%. Most of them were killed in the explosions of the bombs and the panic-stricken stampede. The guns and bullets had greatly increased the turmoil but had not directly killed many people. This result corresponded with the advisor department's predictions. The garrison of the northern region did not have many soldiers and the magic arc could only carry a limited amount of ammunition. Without effective methods to pursue and wipe out the enemies, they could only let most of them run away, but as long as the garrison managed to drive them away, this action could be considered a success. At the end of the battle, more than 1,800 people had dropped their weapons and surrendered, and 25 of them were nobles. The one with the highest rank was an earl who claimed himself to be the Lord of Bloom, but Edith was more interested in a baron named Riemann Peyton. According to the reports, all the nobles had promised to pay the ransom and demanded preferential treatment, except this baron. Riemann had repeatedly emphasized that he had known a distinguished official of Grey Castle for a long time and was a friend of the king. Did he really say that? She asked Eagle Face while shaking the pamphlet in her hand. I assumed that it was just nonsense. Or perhaps, this guy still thinks the king is Timothy Wimbledon. The deputy battalion commander frowned and said. What are you going to do with these nobles? It's impossible for us to let their families ransom them, so throw them into the dungeon. Edith thought for a moment. They may be useful for us in the future. As for the civilian captives, release them now. We don't have the extra food to feed them. Yes. Did you find the king of the Kingdom of Dawn, Appen Moya? We've checked all the corpses and found no one that looked like him. Eagle Face shook his head. During the interrogation, a captive said he had seen Appen and his knights fleeing the battlefield. According to him, Appen and his men changed clothes and brought with them no flag or anything bearing the coat of arms of the royal family, and the others who wanted to join them to escape were all stopped by the king's knights. However, he also admitted that he was not sure about this, for he saw this from a distance, and at that time, the army of the Kingdom of Dawn was in chaos. Where did this captive see this? Inside the old holy city. There's a strong possibility that it was Appen. Edith shrugged her shoulders. It's imperative for him to personally lead such a large army, and if he was marching with the army, where do you think he was? Ugh, at the head of the procession? Eagle Face expressed some uncertainty. To be accurate, he should be behind the vanguard units, she answered. As the old holy city has no walls, the first one getting into the city will collect the most trophies in the robbery. In order to make sure that he was the first to be there, he must have made his own knightage the vanguard to eliminate threats and ensure his own profits. Do you mean that he and his knights were already inside the city before the bomber action started? Well, yes. That's why Appen survived the air attacks launched by Maggie and Hummingbird and had enough time to identify the situation and choose the correct direction to escape. I have to say, he was quite wise to put aside his dignity and act decisively to escape in disguise. Edith slightly raised the corners of her mouth and quickly licked her lips. Damn it. We let the big fish escape, Eagle Face said angrily. If I had arranged another group to chase. No, it's of no use, she interrupted. On such a broad plain, it's not easy to catch him unless you know his escape route in advance. We succeeded in the ambush on the main road just because we took full advantage of their retreating habit and herd mentality. If they had chosen to escape to the wheat fields on the other side of the road, we would not have achieved such an easy victory. The deputy battalion commander did not refute this but still looked very vexed at his failure to catch Appin. You don't need to blame yourself for this. It's not necessarily a bad thing for us. Edith smiled. Why? Eagle Face raised his head in interest. It's complicated to explain. You only need to know that fear is contagious, and when the people of the Kingdom of Dawn realize how formidable we are, they'll never belittle His Majesty's warning. The Pearl of the Northern region paused. Appin Moya will have a difficult time. Knowing that she did not want to explain further, Eagle Face stopped pursuing the matter. So what should we do next? Directly go to occupy the old holy city? No, it's impossible. The 500 people we have are far from enough to fulfill this task. Edith denied his suggestion without hesitation. Let's wait. Miss Maggie has gone to pick up a key person for this task. With her help, we may be able to seize this city effortlessly. Chapter 890, Your Holiness. Isabella. Chapter 890, Your Holiness. Isabella. Isabella was overwhelmed by her emotions when she saw the city again. Unexpectedly, in only a year, the Church, who had been the only hope of humanity to defeat demons, became a barrier to the human race's success in the battle of divine will. She had lived here for a long time but was not sentimentally attached to the Church. The teachings of His Holiness O'Brien kept ringing in her ears and reminded her that the result was always more important than the process. She was certain that if humanity could not defeat the demons, all their efforts would be meaningless. She followed out O'Brien's instructions all her life. She had chosen to support Zero instead of Archbishop Maine since the Soul Swallower had shown more potential in defeating the demons. After Zero had lost to Roland Wimbledon, she had chosen to serve the king. If even now, she could find a leader more powerful than Roland, she would choose the more capable one again without hesitation. She did this for good reason. In her view, the continuation of the human race was far more important than any personal interests. Despite that, she still could not let go of some strange regret deep in her heart. She did not understand why she felt this way until she returned to the old holy city. She discovered that she had been feeling sorry for Zero all this time. Back then, the pure witches had believed that the gulf between them and Zero, who had lived for hundreds of years, would have been exceptionally wide, and many of them had secretly complained about the Soul Swallower's sudden change in moods. However, Isabella had gotten along well with Zero. She found that, in comparison to the other pure witches, who had planned to follow their personal interests throughout the battle of divine will, Zero was much more straightforward and strong-willed. She believed that Zero was not very different from herself except that she was more accustomed to being an assistant while Zero was used to being the leader. She was afraid that it was not Zero's nature but an inevitable choice for an experienced witch who had lived for more than 200 years. She guessed that the holy city would have looked very different if Zero had been able to meet Roland 10 years earlier. Unfortunately, everything had happened too late. After circling the sky twice, Maggie landed in the camp outside the city. "We're here. Let's get off," said Agatha, who was behind Isabella. Isabella nodded and leaped off the beast. Some soldier that was waiting around immediately came over. "Lady Edith is waiting for you in the tent. Please come with me." Roland had asked Maggie to bring the ice witch with Isabella to the old holy city and had explicitly told Isabella that she had to act under the watch of another witch during her prison term. She had willingly accepted this condition. For her, this was already unexpected preferential treatment. She did not have to wear any god's locket of retribution or shackles on her hands and feet. Even her clothes were brand new. After walking into the tent, she saw a woman who stood behind a desk with a smile on her face. "I'm Edith Kant, a member of the Ministry of Defense and temporary commander for the Holy City campaign." A great-looking common woman, Isabella thought. "I thought you would control the Hermes Plateau first and then seize the old holy city." That was the original plan, but the army of the Kingdom of Dawn moved faster than we expected. Edith gave a rough explanation of the situation. His Majesty's order is to ensure the safety of the monasteries, which isn't a problem. The real problematic thing is how to orderly evacuate the orphans from the monasteries. If I remember correctly, they are all nurtured and brought up by the church. I'm afraid it'll hinder our plan if we have to force them out. I think you may have a solution to this problem. After all, His Majesty assigned this task to you before the expedition. Isabella could not help but frown. Wait, you said you came here through Cloud Ladder? Yes, is there something wrong? That place is of great importance and is usually heavily guarded. How come there was no one protecting that passage? Is that so? Edith's voice got deep. But the merchants thought it was just a little-known, secret passage and Sylvie didn't find anything special about it. The church has been based in this place for the past several hundred years and is meticulous about everything here. It's impossible for the church's people to neglect such an important path into the city, which isn't under the control of the city wall. Isabella shook her head. They just intentionally let the smugglers pass freely and planned to use this passage against the coalition of the Four Kingdoms during the months of demons. Its sentry posts were hidden in natural limestone caves in the mountain. That was why the merchants didn't see any guards there. This passage is left unprotected now. Is it because of the breakdown of order in the Holy City? Cloud Ladder is guarded by forces outside the city wall. Theoretically, its sentry posts won't be affected by the situation inside the city. If it's okay with you, I think it's a better idea for me to go to Hermes to have a look. With that being said, Isabella was quite stunned by this situation in her heart. She thought to herself, does this look like a breakdown of order? No, it's more like giving up the city and escaping. Let's address the issue of the monasteries first, Agatha said. Is it possible for us to investigate the situation inside them from the sky? Yes, Miss Lightning has examined all 3 of the main monasteries and found a big issue. It seems that the orphans are organized by someone and are determined to defend their homes to death. That's one of the reasons for us to delay this action. All my soldiers were unharmed during the battle against the army of the Kingdom of Dawn. I don't want to see any casualties inside the city. Edith said with her hands laid out. Somebody organized the orphans? Isabella pondered for a moment. Let me go in and talk to them. By yourself? She was about to say yes but soon realized something was wrong and swallowed her words. Instead, she said, no, Agatha will go with me. La Lady Isabella. Seeing Isabella, Margie suddenly stood upright and put her right hand on her chest unconsciously. I've told you countless times. You're not required to use the courtesy title anymore. Just call me by my name, she said with a straight face. We're no longer pure witches. Yes, my lady. Margie hurriedly nodded. Isabella secretly sighed. His Majesty had only limited her movement but did not restrict Margie or Vanilla. These former pure witches still kept to their old habits from the monastery and occasionally came to the Foreign Affairs building to talk with her about the interesting things they discovered in the Witch Union. Fortunately, Agatha did not mind it. Take us into the city. She pointed to the city that was not far away. Margie summoned the magic ark and turned back to look at Edith, who came to see them off. The First Army isn't going with us? They won't go into the old holy city until you make sure that it's safe. The ark quickly sank into the ground and the soil above their heads turned into a transparent ceiling. Through it, they could see lightning who flew in the sky and showed them the way. There were 4 monasteries inside the old holy city, but they could be thought of as a unified institution. They were built around the Reflection Church, linked together by underground tunnels and connected to secret temple inside the mountain through a secret path. New witches could be easily sent to the incarnation ceremonies through these underground passages, but they were sealed since a newly awakened extraordinary had burnt down one of the monasteries. The magic ark quietly sneaked into the outermost monastery, the Western Zone Monastery. Just like Lightning had said, no one was in the huge courtyard except for 2 skinny girls. They stood at the lobby entrance with spears in their hands, which were much taller than themselves. Here we are. Go up now, said Isabella. Don't you need to slip in to check first? Margie asked in surprise. No, there are too many hidden god stones inside. We don't have to take the risk. Isabella was certain that in important sites such as the monasteries, the church usually placed giant god stones, whose power could reach up to 100 steps away, and she was unable to eliminate their effects. The ark swiftly popped out of the ground, causing panic among the guards. In their eyes, these two women seemed to appear out of nothing. A shrill whistle immediately rang out. All the closed windows were opened one after another, and a dozen of nuns that leading a group of orphans swarmed into the courtyard, holding swords, wooden shields, short bows, and hand crossbows. Agatha summoned her ice in her hand and planned to cover Isabella with it if they began to shoot arrows. Why wait? Stop. Suddenly, the leading nun shouted loudly. Are you, the pure witch beside the Supreme Pontiff? Lady Isabella? Another nun asked with a shaky voice. Hearing this, all the people stopped. Yes, it's me. Isabella nodded calmly. Seeing that these nuns still remembered her, she thought that the task given by His Majesty could be completed smoothly. However, the next moment she was caught off guard by the abrupt change in their attitudes. You really are Lady Isabella. That's great. We're saved. Lady, no, Your Holiness Isabella. Your Holiness, please help us. Supreme Pontiff. Please don't leave us. More and more people dropped their weapons, knelt down, and chanted loudly, Your Holiness. Chapter 891, The Cloister's Bitterness. I'm not the Pope, Supreme Pontiff was. Isabella had the urge to refute, but was stopped by Agatha as she placed a hand on her shoulder. The task at hand is more important. I don't think His Majesty will mind. These words seemed irrelevant, however Isabella quickly understood what Agatha meant. She knew that this form of deception was a simple solution, however these sorts of methods are often seen as a red flag for liege lords that valued power. Isabella decided as she recalled all the things she'd seen in Neverwinter and quickly swallowed her disbelief. Instead, she asked, What do you mean needing us to help you? Where are the judgment warriors and priests? They all fled. Not exactly, some were recalled to the holy city. Another nun refuted. We committed crimes. We even killed the priests. That's not her fault. We have no food, no clothes, and we haven't received supplies throughout the past 2 months. Are we abandoned? Nonsense. Don't you see Her Holiness here? The nuns and orphans started to bicker and shout among themselves. Quiet. I only need one voice, Isabella shouted impatiently. Her eyes moved over the crowd and then she pointed at a nun who seemed to be their leader, saying, You first. Arise and tell me. Yes, Your Holiness. The nun respectfully pressed her forehead on the ground before laboriously struggling onto her feet. It's been over a month since we received news from Hermes. It took Isabella around an hour to get an overall understanding of what had happened here. After the Battle of Coldwind Ridge, each day the amount of the supplies the cloister received steadily declined. At first, portions of food decreased, and then delivery times were slashed. Times were hard yet order was maintained, largely thanks to the secure management the 3 cloisters had adopted and limited information they received from the outside world, reducing panic. The priests and judgment warriors stationed here encouraged the orphans and nuns to pray more and be strong to get through the hard times, claiming that the hard times were almost over. However, such a time never came. What the nun had said about Church's final order to transfer all the judgment warriors and priests back to Hermes was 6 weeks ago. The nuns did not exactly know what the order was at the time, however they remembered how desperate those believers were. Those who were left behind looked as if they lost their souls as they left the great hall. Since then, the cloister destabilized. The institution had vacant positions which would be replaced automatically by lower-ranking subordinates. These positions offered the remaining believers the rights to proclaim themselves as the new priests. However, they abandoned all the duties and responsibilities a priest had to uphold. Neither did they follow the discipline of saving resources set up by their predecessors. Instead, they wantonly squandered the meager rations left and even deducted portions that would have gone to the orphans. It was only when the nuns went to the new priests and bargained for food did they know of monstrous news that the Hermes Cathedral collapsed. The church had reached a point where its very existence was at stake. In order to fight the enemy with all their forces in the last battle, the church's executives decided to give up the old holy city and recall all formal members to the highland. The last order they gave to the people left in the cloister was to resist the invasion on their own, until the last moment of their lives. The turn of events seemed too unrealistic to believe, but the fact that the passage leading to the Reflection Church had been sealed off validated the news. The grievous news had split the nuns into two factions. One called the New Priest faction, consisting of those who were completely disappointed by the old regime. The other faction made up by those who were hesitant and bewildered. The leading nun explained that the church used to be so powerful that there was no need for them to think or even consider their own fates. That was why they were so disturbed by the news. It was like their old, familiar world had suddenly shattered. It was the new priests' selfish deeds that broke the situation. Those new priests came from the bottom, and their usual positions were just a little higher than the nuns. They often assisted the managers to deal with internal affairs without any possible promotion. As a matter of fact, no capable man would be deployed to here. So as soon as they tasted what the power could give them with no one looking over their shoulders, they would naturally become audacious and get out of control. For example, the blessing of the choir and the ritual class. In fact, it should have been banned, but because of the holy city's lax supervision of the cloister. From time to time many dignitaries that had some special interests would come and have some fun, which was no secret here. It's only when that young extraordinary escaped did the church increase supervision. However, now that the security is gone, the new priests didn't have to care about punishments. At first, in the name of blessing, only a few girls were forced, then the whole class had to obey, and at last. The situation became so incredibly hideous that the girls had to give their virginity in exchange for food. This kind of behavior not only violated the laws of the church but also pushed away those hesitating nuns and resulted in their alliance with the orphans. Although girls of different ages were plundered from everywhere in the four kingdoms. The nuns had spent time with them, teaching them to read and sing and imparting the knowledge of ethics and rights to them, so naturally they bonded with the girls. That and the order that the church had given them pushed them to defy the new priests. They frequently stole food from the warehouse for the starving girls. But no matter how much they tried to save the food, they could not stop the decreasing trend of the stock. As priests suspected the nuns' betrayal, conflicts between them broke out. 2 nuns were caught red-handed when they were smuggling food out of the warehouse and were executed by the priest who wanted to intimidate their subordinates. This backfired, however, and ended up disturbing the rest nuns to revolt. Under one nun's leadership, the nuns and orphans planned and prepared. One night when the priests were indulging in entertainment, they launched an attack. The nuns crushed those priests once and for all. Additionally, through the underground tunnels, the leader got contact with the other 2 cloisters. Together, they overthrew the disgusting believers in the same way. When they attempted to send a representative who would find a way to cross the high wall and report the plight here to Hermes, the army from the Kingdom of Dawn appeared on the border of the old holy city. Since they had been abandoned, they had no choice but to resist by themselves. Everyone knew that once the enemy took the cloister, even surrender would not do them any good. That was why Isabella saw them in a hasty defense stance as she came in. Isabella was very confused after she heard the nuns recount. The corrupt custom in the cloister was not unknown to her, nor was she surprised to see the incompetent believers deprave so quickly after they gained power. However, what surprised her was the order from the church. In order to do battle with the enemy one last time? If that was true, they could never ignore to guard the mountain path if they were intending to give up the outer city walls. It was like they had handed over the first defense line to the enemy voluntarily. Even though the holy city had run so short of manpower that it could not keep an eye on the cloud ladder. It was impossible for them to bring out any words like, "Give up the old holy city." Isabella knew, without a doubt, that there was a secret area of the church that was hidden from most of the believers. Neither the new holy city in the highland nor the old holy city at the foot of the mountain was the heart of the church. It was the pivotal secret area resting deep under the ground that was the church's one true core, a 400-years-old place where they mined the god stone, studied the sigils of magic stones, and held the incarnation ceremony of God's punishment army. The old holy city had a secret path leading to the pivotal area, and even the main exit of the path led here. How could they abandon such a crucial site so easily? The order was full of flaws, a complete lie. Chapter 892, Appreciated. There must be someone lying, the church or the nuns. Isabella could not think of any reasons for the nuns to make up an order, since they were abandoned and discarded. Judging from their pale, emaciated look, she estimated that probably one more fortnight of starvation would kill them all. But if the church was lying, what were they going to do by recalling all the formal members to Hermes and leaving the cloud ladder and the old holy city unguarded? Trying to set aside her speculation, Isabella looked at the leading nun and asked, "What should I call you?" "I am called Chio, Your Holiness." "Haven't you ever thought of getting out of here?" "What, why?" The nun seemed surprised. "Granted that the walls are high and the gate is thick, they're not impassable. 6 weeks should have been long enough for all of you to make a wooden ladder or stack the firewood at the bottom of the gate to burn the planks and melt the chain. You're free to do anything that could get yourself out of here," Isabella said, confused whilst trying to ascertain the validity of the situation. "Since you could send a representative to report to Hermes, why didn't you get out of here together? With the food supplies severed, you're facing a certain death even without the army of the Kingdom of Dawn's invasion." It took Cho a long moment to come back from silence. She muttered, Where could we possibly go if we leave here?" All the residents of the cloister lowered their heads at the question. "I've never left the cloister." "Nor have I. Although there's not much, at least we have something to eat." "I don't think the outside world would be better." Some orphans joined in. "If we start to beg for food, then our lives will revert back to the one we used to have. The book told us that we shouldn't take begging for granted. I don't want to live like that anymore." Looking at their bewildered looks, Isabella finally realized that it was not the church's order that bound them. They knew nothing else but their sheltered life. The situation seemed neither good nor bad. It would be easy to cope with the nuns. Just kill the ones who were still loyal to the holy city and be done with it. But if all the orphans here had become obstinately loyal, that would become a thorn to His Majesty. "I have one more question." Isabella drew a deep breath and asked in a low voice, "Why do you address me as the Supreme Pontiff?" "Well," Chio looked intimidated. She hesitated for a while before saying, "Pope Main was dead, and so were the 3 archbishops. There's no new nomination declared in Hermes, so according to the institution, we have to promote all the subordinates to fill in the gaps. You're the one closest to the Holy Temple. Pope Isabella, please help us. Please don't leave us behind. We'll bear whatever punishment you'll give us. Please take us back to Hermes." Again, the nuns started to plead. "It appears that they did not call me Her Holiness for anything particular, but for the chance to regain the church's attention," Isabella thought. The institution was not suitable for the top-level executives in the church as they were already at the top. However, the ones who were drowning at the bottom of the hierarchy could not care less. They would clutch anything that could save their lives as tight as they could, even it was a fragile straw. As Isabella thought of this, she weaved an idea in her head. "I'm here to tell you an important thing. Listen carefully." All of them held their breaths. "The church has changed," Isabella said loudly. Maine was no real pope. He not only betrayed Lord O'Brien but also stole the throne. In fact, there was another successor to whom Lord O'Brien meant to pass his power. The words were like a stone that created numerous ripples as it was tossed into the water. The listeners burst into an uproar. "The successor was his first pure witch, Zero," Isabella said. She did not know what His Majesty would think of those words, but since she started off, she would do her best. "Grey Castle isn't our enemy." Instead, in order to defend the real enemy, Lord O'Brien even hoped to ally the church with Grey Castle. "Do you mean the demonic beasts?" Someone could not help asking. They're more fearful than the demonic beasts. Isabella shook her head and said, they're recorded in canon within the church that only a very few people could see. Maine was averse to let the pure witch seize the power, so he secretly revolted and framed Zero, who was about to leave for Grey Castle, as a messenger. That's the cause for the Battle of Coldwind Ridge. Fortunately, Maine's trick didn't work out. I survived that battle, yet the initiators of the rebellion died within more than a month. There was no doubt that they were punished by the deities. There's no so-called last battle, and you don't need to hold the cloister alone to the last moment, either. She paused. You're safe now. Both the nuns and the orphans looked as though they could not believe their ears. What about our punishment for killing the priests? They had dishonored their names and therefore disqualified for what they had done, so I decided spare all of you. There was a moment of silence. Then they started to cheer wildly. Thank you. Your merciful holiness. Long live Pope Isabella. Long live your holiness. Isabella pressed her palms downward to make them calm down before she continued, just as I said, I'm no pope. The rules don't really make me attain that role. I'm just the executor of Supreme Pontiff, as I was before. But you still represent the Church of Hermes. Chio said, thrilled. I have a mission for you, Isabella said clearly and with certainty. Of course, that's after all of you eat your fill. The nuns and the orphans knelt again after hobbling back to their feet. They said as one, at your service. Isabella knew very well that those people did not side with her because they were convinced by her. They had been forsaken and should have been done for. Now that they were given the hope to return to the church, they naturally would devote anything, even if the church they would know now was not real. Supposing that the real Church of Hermes was still standing, they might mull over whether they had made the right choice after they removed themselves from the plight and cooled down. But that was impossible now. By the time the first army arrived, what she had said would definitely come true. Only by breaking their old beliefs of the church and instilling a half-true story she had made up as the new truth. King Roland would now be able to control this land veritably. It's very simple. I want you to restore order in the old holy city, Isabella said methodically. Chio, first gather the residents of the 2 other cloisters and retell them my words. You must also see to it that every child gets their portion of food before nightfall. The first army of Grey Castle will answer your call and help you. Since they had known that it was Maine and other men who betrayed, they wouldn't make things difficult for you. After that, all of you must walk out and inform every household of the news and note the names of whom have left and stayed respectively. If you run into the treasonous priests or the believers, report to me immediately. As the orders were given, the nuns went into action right after they answered the yes. The situation they were in did not magically improve, but a new outlook and hope dwindles in their eyes. Soon, they ripped down the gate. When a nun was about to take the girls out of the cloister in order, one girl suddenly bowed low to Isabella. Thank you, Lady Isabella. The other girls followed her behavior one after another. You're so nice, my lady. I'll remember you forever. Every girl in the line echoed these kinds of words. Thanking me, Isabella slightly closed her eyes, lost in thought. She had received much hatred and many curses since the day she became a pure witch, yet this was the first time she was being thanked. But what she had done was not for gaining gratitude, but for her goal. She would also put those people to death without the slightest hesitation if that was needed to achieve her goal. So, this kind of gratitude seemed unwanted to her. Although that was she had been thinking, Isabella felt like something unknown emerged in her heart, a feeling she had never had before. She could feel a soft distension occurring in her heart and warmth like a fire. Isabella thought she would resist the feeling, but it was not as annoying as she had expected. Was this King Roland's intention? Isabella slightly lets out a breath and then slowly followed the end of the line to the camp. Chapter 893, Fate Passes On. Translator, Trans-En Editor, Trans-En. 2 weeks later, when summer was already nearing its end, Roland finally arrived at Hermes. He was welcomed at the gates of the holy city by the witches and the first army garrison from the northern region. He also spotted several nuns in black church clothing amongst the group of people. Although Roland had heard from Lightning that all the top-level figures of the church had disappeared, he still couldn't believe what had happened as he entered this now empty stronghold. The fierce battle that he thought awaited them did not come. Neither the gods' punishment witches nor the new mortars had to be used. There was no doubt that things couldn't have gone any better, but this turn of events just felt somewhat anticlimactic for Roland. He had made a right decision in letting Isabella come along with the first army to this expedition. According to the reports from Eagle Face and Agatha, the former Pure Witch was quickly alerted to the strange happenings within the church and promptly suggested the army to investigate the holy city of Hermes right after they finished taking care of the orphans in the cloisters. To their surprise, the entire city was empty except for the people who lived in the surrounding areas. They didn't get to leave in time, thus creating a facade that the church was still under operations. In reality, those people had no idea about what was really happening in the inner city, and all they heard was that the church was preparing for the last battle. After that, the nuns, organized by Isabella, entered Hermes and visited as many houses as possible to explain the situation. As a result, the number of evacuees started to decrease, and at least no more large groups of people were spotted fleeing towards Wolfheart and Everwinter. The church abandoning the holy city was such a shocking turn of events for the people, and it had utterly ruined the church's reputation. Compared to those cowards who ran at the first sign of danger, the nuns who came out and tried to restore order seemed more like the real successors of the old church. How did they escape? Roland could not help asking. The message he had received did not include many details, so Roland wanted to know where the remnants of the church had gone. There ought to be thousands of people in the inner city. How could they have managed to leave the plateau without passing through the city wall? There are many tunnels under Hermes, some of which go under the city wall. If they evacuated in batches, it would have been possible for them to escape without alerting the residents in the outer city. Isabella explained. The tunnels were designed to work only one way so that intruders wouldn't be able to take advantage of it. Moreover, the tunnels can only be used once. I've checked a lot of tunnel entrances, and most of them were already destroyed. Where do the tunnels lead to? Only people who have used them would know, Isabella said as she shook her head. If they had planned the escape beforehand, it would be near impossible to track them now that they already had 6 weeks to run. So the church is like a cornered lizard, cutting off its tail to escape, and hoping for a chance to come back in the future? Roland frowned as he pondered over this. But giving up the holy city meant that they abandoned their base of operations, which is far worse than just losing a tail, as this was as good as them losing everything. How could they be so confident that they would be able to find a new base that can rival Grey Castle? Or are they going to scatter into different places and harass my land? Thinking about how he had to keep an eye out for fanatical believers in the coming years gave Roland a headache. No need to worry, Your Majesty. They won't come back anymore, Isabella smiled, as she read Roland's mind. Why? Roland was surprised. Isabella replied, they left behind a messenger. In a small church on the north side of the holy city, Roland met the messenger that Isabella mentioned. He was a grizzled old man in a brand new red priest robe hemmed with gold. Seized by 2 guards, he walked out with a thick book held in his arms. The old man hobbled towards them unsteadily, but he kept his chin up as he tried to strike an imposing figure. He cast a cold glance at Isabella and then looked at Roland. Are you the king of Grey Castle, Roland Wimbledon? Yes, that is I. You have your father's grey hair and grey eyes, the old man said slowly. My name is Jacob, the high priest of the holy city. In your terms, my position would be similar to that of a duke. But of course, I don't own any land, nor do I need that many servants. I heard that you've insisted on waiting for me here? Roland shrugged. What happened? Why didn't they take you with them when they turned tail? I wanted to stay, the old man said solemnly as if these were his last words. I'm too old to run. Even if I could go with them, there won't be much time left for me. I'd rather be buried in this city than start a new but short life. New life? Roland quickly seized the keywords. Yes. Let go all of our duties and live a new and peaceful life for the rest of our days. Jacob's voice sounded satirical. You've won, Your Majesty. The church won't be fighting against you anymore. This city will become yours with everything intact, and so will our nightmares. If you so desire. Oh? Roland said noncommittally. What other reasons do you think that made us guard this barren plateau? The old man's voice rose. Look what you've done. Humans are going to perish because of you. Really? What a harsh accusation. However, I don't see why I have to bear it. Roland said as he roughly understood the high priest's intention. Surely enough, the church would not let him take the city so easily, and even though they did not have the force to fight back, they would try to obstruct him mentally. Zero had tried the same trick before the final battle between them, although their intentions were different. If Roland knew nothing about the battle of divine will, then the news about how the demons would soon annihilate humankind would have definitely taken him by surprise. Additionally, if the church manipulated the truth and made it seem like he was at fault for mankind's imminent destruction, then they would have succeeded in breaking his will. Accusation? Sigh, what gibberish. Do I look like I'm kidding? Oh, young and untested king, it appears that Her Holiness, the pure witch, didn't tell you the truth. Jacob gave Isabella a meaningful look before he continued. The church was laden with a heavy responsibility that is beyond imagination and is unknown to all but a few superiors of the church. You have no idea what kind of enemy we've been preparing to fight over the past few centuries. Now that you've ruined the church, like it or not, you must take full responsibility for what is going to happen. When the end comes for us all, you will only be able to helplessly watch on as your kingdom get razed to the ground. It seems that this man is not only attempting to attack me mentally but is also trying to take any opportunities to alienate me from Isabella. It's a shame that he has misjudged me and sent the wrong signals. As Roland looked at the self-righteous old priest, an old quote came to mind, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. You don't have to believe me, but a truth is a truth. As the priest said this, another sentence emerged in Roland's head, people die if they are killed. Jacob let out a long breath after he finished those words. He then flipped open the book in his hands and handed it over, saying, "This is the canon of the church. You'll understand all the foolish things you've done after you read it. No, I should say the human being's real enemy is the demons, right?" Roland chipped in casually. You built the holy city here not to fight against the demonic beasts, but for the god's stone mines in the mountain. There's a pivotal secret area under the cathedral, where you mined the god's stones and made the god's punishment army, and that's the true form of the church. Of course, I don't know if you've learned this information, for only the Pope was entitled to know of the incarnation ceremony of the god's punishment army. Oh, were you going to tell me the battle of divine will or the divine smile? The battle that occurs every 400 or so is no news to me. Furthermore, the demons are not some invisible ghosts either. In fact, I've fought against them before. So, what else do you want me to know? At the moment, Jacob was so shocked that he opened his mouth, stammered, yet failed to make out any words. He looked like he would pass out at any moment. After a while, he pointed his shaking finger at Isabella and said, "It's you." But Isabella shook her head softly. "I didn't tell him that," she said. "From the very beginning, he knew much more than we had expected. You have underestimated him, or more like, we all did." "Now that you've finished your story, let me tell you mine," Roland said, giving a cold laugh. Chapter 894, Worthy to Save the World. Translator, Trans-N Editor, Trans-N. Since there were still some First Army soldiers present, Roland omitted the origin of the Battle of Divine Will in his story. He briefed the old man only on the part of the history of how the witch empire of old had transformed into the church. Despite the fact that Roland had only briefly mentioned bits and pieces of the story that he knew, Jacob was still shocked when he realized just how much Roland already knows about humanity's past. His eyes widened every time the church's highly confidential information just slipped out of Roland's mouth as if it was worth nothing. In the end, Jacob's eyes got so large that they looked like a pair of lanterns. Every time the old man wanted to refute what Roland had said, his words would end up being caught on his lips. A lot of what Roland said was beyond his understanding, yet it all fit perfectly with the rumors that went around within the church. Roland paused as he saw the old priest gasping for breath. He didn't stop talking because he had nothing else to say, but out of concern for the old guy who looked like he would pass out any second now. Of course, Roland didn't really care if the old man were to pass out, he just wanted to enjoy the face-smacking some more. He did not continue until Jacob had finally caught his breath. It looks like you were never told about the inner workings of the church. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been so shaken by these trivial facts. You can't berate me for talking nonsense even if you want to, because you can't help but find what I said just now similar to the clues you have found out yourself in the past. I believe that all the knowledge of the demons and the battle of divine will had been passed down by generation after generation by the popes, to keep the goal, or should I say, the faith, unforgotten. However, the current fools who call themselves the successor of the church have a fear of witches that runs so deep, that they dare not reveal the truth of the past. Not to mention the will of the first pope. You people proclaim to be fighting for humanity, yet how many believers in the entire holy city of Hermes are even aware of the existence of the demons and the upcoming battle? But this isn't how things are run in Grey Castle. Information about the battle of divine will is no secret in Neverwinter. Every minister working under me knows of the demons. The planning and preparation for the upcoming battle of divine will form one of Neverwinter's fundamental policies. Be it farmers or blacksmiths, all my subjects are doing their best in contributing to the inevitable fight against evil. That's the largest difference between us. I've been preparing Grey Castle to withstand the onslaught of our enemy for years. Roland took in the look of distraught apparent on the old man's face with joy before he continued. Do you still think that the church is the one and only savior of humankind? Don't you think you've been thinking too highly of yourselves? Even if we set aside the fact of whether or not I will be able to come out victorious against this powerful enemy, one thing is still for certain. He walked over to the old priest and spelled out his next words slowly. How can the church hope to save the world when they can't even defeat me? Stop dreaming. Roland's words had caused Jacob's face to turn pale as if the last sentence had pierced through his heart. Jacob had indeed questioned the church's strength in his mind before, but he had always kept his doubts hidden. Now that the truth was brutally shoved in front of his face, he had lost even the last bits of his remaining determination. The old priest then felt strength leave his legs and he collapsed onto the floor, and the dignified look deserving of a respectful figure that he initially displayed quickly disappeared from his face without a trace. Take him back to the dungeons, Roland ordered, waving one hand. He is too old to work in the mines. Keep him alive until the bloody moon comes and have him witness how my people fight against the demons. I hope by then he would still remember how to repent to God. Yes, Your Majesty. The soldiers pulled Jacob up and carried him away by his arms. Roland turned to look at Isabella and said, Well done. Without you, we wouldn't have restored order in the holy city in such a short time. Isabella, being unlike her usual self, looked away from her king and said in a slightly shaky voice, Is this really okay? Do you really want me to be the one to give the orders as the Pope's representative and gather those who were abandoned? He had received reports from Edith, Eagle-Face, and Isabella herself, and understood their proposal to rewrite history to split up the church once and for all. The Pearl of the Northern region had praised this move, saying that it would help Grey Castle conquer both the old and the new holy city and take over all the influence that the church had accumulated over the centuries. Even if the scattered believers somehow found themselves an opportunity to start up a new organization, they would look like illegitimate rogues in comparison to Roland, who had actual control over Hermes. Roland, on the other hand, looked at this move in a more practical way. Located in the middle of the impassable mountain range and facing the Big Breach, this piece of plateau would be a major choke point for them to defend in the battle of divine will. Roland had intended to take over the place since the day he planned to wage war on Hermes. Now that they could utilize the local workforce and resources to their advantage and cut down expenditures for Neverwinter, Roland didn't see why they shouldn't go ahead with the plan. What would I have to mind if what you did turns out to be effective? Roland said, smiling. However, your sentence still stands. I never had that kind of intention, Isabella said hurriedly. But of course, I can't leave you unrewarded for your help either. Roland waved his hands and said, if there's ever a day when you're required to intervene as a representative, then in that day you shall be treated properly, in a way that is befitting of a representative. What do you think? In a way that is befitting of a representative? The representative would be equivalent in status to the prime minister or the hand of the king. Roland smiled. Of course, this wouldn't give you the equivalent authority or power, but only the accommodation and food, such as a commodious, a posh suite, delicacies served by imperial cooks, all the chaos drinks you could ever desire, and more. If you don't want them, you're allowed to take an equivalent amount of gold royals. No, Your Majesty. Isabella shook her head. The former is good. I mean, just have it your way. Well, that's settled then, Roland said pleasantly. As the main body of the First Army joined in the investigation in the city, the detailed workings of the foreign city slowly became clear before Roland. To his surprise, the old priest did not exaggerate when he said, with everything intact. Apart from the collapsed Hermes Cathedral, all the buildings were in excellent condition. Even the broken parts of the city wall had been repaired, and the mangonels that stood upon the wall were left untouched. In addition, a large number of berserk pills that Isabella had mentioned in her report rested quietly in the underground cellar. According to the inventory count that they made, there were around 240,000 pills in total. Thinking that Zero planned to use millions of berserk soldiers to fight against the demons, Roland was relieved that her plan never came to fruition. After the inventory count, they set up a big fire on the high city wall to burn the pills into ashes that were eventually swept down off the wall and left frozen in the dirt. At last, the threat of a crazed army that had bothered him all this time eventually came to an end. But the investigation report included some even more interesting things. Such as food and weapons. Every day since the investigation began, the First Army would find new hidden goods that had been amassed in frightening amounts. The resources they have found so far were enough to equip and maintain several orders of knights. No wonder that Apen Moya, the King of Dawn, and his feudatories were willing to travel thousands of miles to plunder this city. Roland noticed that the top-level executives of the church had only taken the gold royals and jewels, leaving most of the war supplies untouched, which partly proved that they would no longer return and were instead fleeing away to start a new unfettered life. The Leviathan that nested in the northwest of Grey Castle had finally bitten the dust. Roland had a lot of free time now. All he needed to do was to wait for Iron Axe to annex the eastern region and march the army to the border of their neighboring country where they could join forces. After that, they would work together to outflank the Kingdom of Dawn. With free time he didn't usually have, Roland wanted to look around the city that the church had run for hundreds of years. After all, the holy city of Hermes was incomplete in the memory fragment. The place he would like to visit the most would undoubtedly be the place of the Phantom, the reflection church that Isabella had told him before. It was said that it was by phantom playback that Alice, the Queen of Starfall City, managed to pass down her faith across hundreds of years. That was also the place where Zero finished her transformation from a pure witch to the Pope. Chapter 895, Reflections of the Past. In a way, the Reflection Church was not only the place for the transition of power between popes, but also a museum. The busts of the past influential figures of the church radiated historical significance, not to mention the sigil of magic stones which could replay major historical events in the form of holographic images. If it were to become a tourist attraction for future generations, it would definitely be very profitable. But if Roland wanted to enter it now, he would have to spend quite an effort. Although the Reflection Church was right beneath the old Holy City Church in a totally mirrored way, the two churches were not connected. The slate and clay between them were as thick as 10 meters with God's stones of retaliation mixing in the wall, so forcefully digging through with manpower or phasing through it by using the magic arc would both be extremely troublesome. After inquiring about the details with Isabella, Roland decided to instead enter the Reflection Church through the tunnels under the cloister. After all, those tunnels used to be unobstructed. Although they were purposely sabotaged and blocked, it would still be easy for the magic arc to go through them. More importantly, the abandoned tunnels were not under the influence of God's stones. Compared with the entire cave that was under the influence of the God's stone mineral vein, the tunnels seemed to be a much safer and reliable choice. To avoid getting lost, Roland asked Sylvie to scan the whole underground structure to determine the best route for this sightseeing trip. The witches were alerted by all the preparation that was going on and so learned about Roland's upcoming trip. On the day of his departure, Roland found a crowd of people gathering outside his tent, with the little girl, Lightning, being the most excited of them all. "Your Majesty, how can you leave me behind for such an important expedition?" She pouted after saying that as she felt that she had been wronged. "Am I not your chief explorer?" "Coo, coo. Adventure, coo." Maggie agreed. This is only a sightseeing tour. There won't be anything exciting in the places where popes conduct the transition of power, let alone any danger." "But I want to go with you, can I?" the little girl asked with her sparkly puppy eyes. How was Roland supposed to say no to this? Now that the floodgates were opened, the witches' requests came one after another. "Your Majesty, take me too," Hummingbird asked in a low voice. "I can help you with the luggage. As a member of the Quest Society, how can I miss such a key moment?" "Am I right, Your Majesty?" Agatha asked. "I'll go wherever Elder Sister Anna goes," Nana said with a clear voice. "What if the underground building is infected by the demonic plague? Didn't you say that places which lack ventilation are the perfect environments for bacteria to grow?" Lily asked seriously. "Since the Queen of Starfall City is there, I'd like to see her again." Apart from the witches, even number 76 Phyllis came to express her desire to join. Wait a moment, was she not an enemy of tequila? Roland curiously asked. But she was still a respectable leader. If not for Lady Alice, we wouldn't have even survived until the split between Tequila and Starfall City. In the end, pretty much everyone was able to get the free trip to the Reflection Church that they wished for. Originally, Roland only planned to take Anna, Nightingale, Sylvie, and Isabella with him. But now, due to the increase in participants, Margie had to go back and forth several times before she was able to transport everybody into the abandoned tunnel. Although these complex tunnels were shut down long ago, they were still in good conditions, with no sign of leakage or erosion. Although the tunnels were quite dusty, the group still traveled through them without much of a hitch. After walking for about 15 minutes, they arrived at the upper region of the Reflection Church. Under the guidance of Isabella, they soon arrived at a grand hall. The hall's width was nothing impressive, but the ceiling extended so far that Roland could only see the pillars extend into the darkness above. In other words, its height was much greater than its width. Despite its grandness, Roland felt claustrophobic the moment he entered the hall. It felt like he was walking through an extremely deep valley. Even though stones of lighting illuminated both sides, their faint yellow light was only able to light up a small part of the hall. "This is the prayer room. The portraits of all the previous popes are hung on the walls of this hall," Isabella explained while walking. On the day of power transition, O'Brien, taking Maine, visited here too. But the Archbishop did not know that O'Brien took someone else with him. "That was Zero," Roland said with a low voice. "Yes. Normally, a pure witch would strictly be forbidden from entering this area. Even the witches used to instill magic in the sigils were chosen from those soon to be sacrificed. As soon as they saw the phantoms, they would then go through the God's Punishment Army's incarnation ceremony." Isabella nodded. The moment that Zero arrived here, she had become a candidate for the Pope. "Disgusting." Nightingale snarled, although it was unsure whether she was referring to the incarnation ceremony or Zero. Isabella shut her mouth sensibly. When everybody arrived at the end of the hall, a full-length portrait taking up the entire wall appeared in front of them. Different from the passage under the dim yellow light, this portrait's frame was surrounded by stones of light. Every detail of the portrait was vividly exhibited under the soft light. Although Roland had heard many times about the appearance of the Queen of Witches from Agatha and other witches, when he saw her portrait with his own eyes, an unspeakable feeling rose from his heart. In the portrait, Alice was holding a sword with both hands and looking at the front. She looked as if gazing into the unpredictable future, while at the same time examining Roland. There was no single word that can describe her accurately. She was soft yet strong, cold yet fiery. One could never forget her as soon as one laid eyes upon her. However, if a pretty face was all that she had, Roland would not have been too surprised. On Alice, there was the overwhelming aura of a natural leader, an aura so intense it seemed as if she was born with God's honor, leading her followers to victory until the end of time. "What a beautiful woman," Anna said with complicated feelings. "Fortunately, she's gone." "Hey, what do you mean by that?" Roland patted her head slightly. "Even if Alice were alive, would I have been head over heels for her?" But seeing Nightingale who was by his side, he decided not to voice out his thoughts. "I have nothing to hide, but if she judged that what I said was not the whole truth or partly true partly false, what can I do then?" After appreciating the looks of the Queen of Starfall City, they walked into the illusion room concealed behind the giant painting. 9 sigils of magic stones are stored here. I haven't seen all of them. Some of them seem to have been passed down from the older generations. Isabella pressed at a magic stone. "If you wish to see all of them, I'll activate them one by one." "Then let's begin." Roland nodded. Their surroundings suddenly became pitch dark. Chapter 896, Dust-Laden Secrets. In the darkness, Roland felt that 2 hands had simultaneously grabbed him. Nightingale said alertly, "What's going on?" "The illusion created by this sigil is directly projected into everyone's brain," Agatha explained. "It will seem like you have been teleported to another world alone, but the reality is unaffected. We're still standing in the Grand Hall. If you don't want to watch it, you can just walk out of the effective range of the sigil," Isabella added. Not long after, the darkness gradually faded away, and the transparent glass dome, marble floor, and spacious round table appeared in front of their eyes. Sitting around the table were witches in the Union-style copes. Among them was the impressive Queen of Starfall City whose hair was as fiery red. Although this was a scene from 400 years ago, everything in the Phantom looked so realistic. Even the tea on the table was giving off puffs of hot steam. It felt as if a moment that had long been buried history had been revived to the present once again. If such a technique had existed from where Roland came from, historians who had worked their asses off in the dirt to search for a few pieces of text fragments would definitely be moved to tears. Seeing that there was no danger, one hand let go of Roland. However, the other one did not loosen its grip at all, but instead moved down, and eventually the two's fingers were tightly intertwined with each other. Roland instantly knew who that was. He smiled and softly squeezed the other person's fingers before he shifted his attention to the center of the Phantom. Isabella activated the magic stones one after another. The locations in the Phantoms changed from the witch's escape route to Tequila, then to Starfall City. As Alice became younger and younger, the appearing witches kept on changing, and by the end, only a few familiar faces could be seen. Undoubtedly, during this prolonged brutal war, the Union suffered tremendous losses, and very few senior witches were able to survive until the escape. This was the result of the Witch Empire's systemic flaw: the more powerful a witch was, the higher ranked she would be. It sounded logical, but when war erupted, the high-ranking witches had to fight on the front lines themselves, instead of commanding the war effort from somewhere safe. Roland had heard from Agatha that Alice evolved into a transcendent during an extremely dangerous battle. During her reign, she went through several massive battles just like that one. In other words, if she had made even a single mistake, then the history of the Union, or maybe even the history of the entire human race, would have turned out differently. Such was the case for the head of the 3 chairs, let alone the other high-ranking witches. As a matter of fact, that system did not provide a suitable place for leaders to be developed. A rookie only had to survive 1 or 2 battles and taste some fresh blood to become a veteran, yet a high-ranking officer had to go through quite a few battles and witness thousands of deaths to genuinely mature. Having the leader personally lead a charge was indeed the best way of enhancing an army's morale, but this should only be used as a last resort. If everything went well, the troops would keep on fighting with high morale without the need for a leader to make an appearance. Leaders and common troops do not have the same value. When faced with a large-scale war where large numbers of casualties were inevitable, such a practice was truly reckless. Roland was not expecting to find any astonishing secrets through the sigils. He believed the past popes must have repeatedly watched these phantoms, so if there were records about the origins of the divine will or the nature of the relics of gods, then the church wouldn't have fallen to such a sorry state today. The purpose of his trip was, apart from satisfying his curiosity, to gain some more experiences for himself. He found that what had happened was more or less the same as he had imagined. As the phantom played out, the group mostly saw scenes such as important conferences, festivals, and battle mobilizations. It was understandable that the sigils of magic stones were only used on such occasions. According to Agatha, sigils that were able to last for such a long time cost quite a fortune. Soon enough, they came to the last phantom. Alice and the other two chairs were nowhere to be found, and instead, there was a crowd of senior witches in disheveled clothing. The image quality was also visibly worse than the previous playbacks. Agatha asked with surprise, "Are those people the founders of the early Union?" Phyllis asked. "Who are they?" Roland asked, raising his eyebrow. "The extraordinaries who survived the first battle of divine will. It was them who founded the Union. Look at the documents on the table." "Could this be?" Phyllis asked in surprise. "Indeed." Agatha's voice was full of joy. "I never expected to witness the well-known vow of the three queens with my very own eyes." Roland was bewildered. He raised his head and tried to get a better look, only to find texts written with magic power, which were only readable to witches. "Can someone explain what the vows were about?" "Allow me." Agatha's voice came from in front of him. It was considered as a symbolic event in the history of the Union where this loose organization integrated into a centralized power. This event was something every awakened witch had to learn about. After the end of the first battle of divine will, the Union, which was entirely under the witches' rule, was founded. At that time, different opinions were circling around the young organization, whether it was about the ruling of ordinary people or the methods of fighting against demons. Such debates lasted for years until three major powers emerged. Over time, the three forces grew until they finally overpowered the other lords and city-states, after which the Union ended up with the oligarchic organizational structure that we all know about. Were the three powers Starfall City, Tequila, and Arietta? Nightingale asked. That's right. Due to the special positions of these three holy cities, their lords were often crowned as queen, Agatha replied. The three chiefs of the last tenure in the Union were the Queen of Starfall City Alice, the Queen of Sunchester Natalia, and the Queen of Moonradiance Eleanor. No wonder. Roland thought. To witches in that era, the vow of the three queens was more or less the same as the founding constitutional amendments of a nation. This event signified the point after which the Union had transformed from an unofficial alliance to a unified political entity. No wonder witches like Agatha and Phyllis were this excited about the vow. Indeed, it had important historical significance. Although the Union ended up in a disaster, without the three chiefs system, it would have been defeated much sooner in the Second Battle of Divine Will, let alone leaving behind the numerous witches who took on resisting demons, recovering Tequila as their lifelong mission. But such information was not particularly interesting to Roland. With his mind drifting away, he laid eyes on the minor details in the phantom, such as the witches' clothing, the cups and stationery they used, and the furniture and decoration in the hall. Since Alice came from a time several centuries ago, the furnishings of her age were much shabbier. Obviously, after the defeat of the First Battle of Divine Will, the domain of the witches ended up in an extremely underdeveloped stage. On the walls of the conference hall, Roland saw over 10 portraits, and surprisingly, 2 of them were men. He guessed that they were probably some outstanding heroic figures from the war. Apparently, at that time, the Union hadn't started to consider ordinary people as lower beings, since men could still attend such an important conference. Just when Roland was about to ask Agatha whether she knew who they were, he felt as if all the blood in his body suddenly froze. An indescribable chill rose from the bottom of his feet and penetrated through his spine. The panic was so intense that goosebumps sprung on his arms and his fingertips started to shiver slightly. "What's wrong?" Noticing his uneasiness, Anna asked urgently. That painting." Swallowing his saliva, Roland was able to barely stutter out his words. "Painting? The person in the painting. I've seen her before." It took him quite a lot of effort to utter those words. Although the phantom was not as clear as the previous ones, he could still distinguish the silhouette of the person in the second to the last portrait. It was a middle-aged woman, not outstanding in appearance, with her black hair coiled on the top of her head, one of her eyes covered with a patch, and was sitting on a high-backed chair with her hands crossed over each other. Her appearance was exactly the same as Lon, Garcia's master in Roland's dream world. Chapter 897, Jungle Fiesta. The heavy rain in the jungle had washed away most of the corpse's bloody smell. An ordinary hunter might have found it hard to search for his target under this kind of condition. But for Lorgar, the faint smells that were mixed with the rainwater were more than sufficient for her to hunt. For example, she knew that a number of animals had died at the same spot. She could sense that within the different smells of blood, some still smelled fresh, while others carried a rancid odor. This means that several animals had all died at the same place for some time. It was unlikely for the smell of small animals such as rabbits, rats, and foxes to spread for so far, and even if it did, the smell shouldn't have been so distinct. In other words, this scent most likely came from the carcasses of large animals no smaller than bulls or horses. The creature that dragged all these large animal carcasses around must have possessed a certain level of strength. Mass storing food this way was also a frequent habit among the carnivorous predators. Such places were often the nest of these predators. Most importantly, Lorgar caught an indescribably foul smell within the stench of blood. This was the smell unique to those of hybrid demonic beasts. Had she not turned into a wolf, she would have been only able to smell some odor in the end. Only when she used her ability to transform could she detect the subtle differences in the damp air. There was a hint of magic power in that smell. Not every demonic hybrid could absorb magic power, but this one must be a demonic hybrid since its blood contained traces of magic power, making the beast much stronger than ordinary demonic beasts. It was also one of the improvements she made through hunting in the jungle for these past few months. If she could have mastered this technique before the holy duel, the four-winged eagle that attacked her from the air wouldn't have even been able to touch her. Although the climate, the environment, and the prey in the barbarian land were far different from those in the desert, the technique for hunting was fairly similar. Basically, when it came to hunting, it was all down to being cautious, meticulous, and patient no matter where he or she was. Lorgar's current target was a large demonic hybrid bear. When it stood up, its height was as tall as 3 men standing atop one another, and it looked like a mobile iron tower. Lorgar could not tell which demonic beast it managed to integrate with. The monster's skin was as thick as armor and could not be bitten through even by her sharp fangs. Its head looked even crazier. It had 4 eyes, 2 in the back, which made her sure-kill techniques such as a sneak attack from the back and biting the throat lose their usual effect. 5 days ago, Lorgar had encountered the demonic bear. After a harsh fight, she broke 2 claws while the bear lost half of its forefoot and ran away with its stomach cut open. This bear-like beast was probably the trickiest prey to deal with within the barbarian land ever since Lorgar had gotten there. It was just about as strong as the legendary beast of the desert. If this monstrosity were instead the first opponent that she had to face after arriving in the barbarian land, then she would have been the one running for her life. But now, things are different. She was able to get plenty of battle experience from all the other demonic beasts she had killed before this. Nevertheless, it was a hunt. Not a duel. She brought herbs cultivated by Leaf and the cleansing water made by Lily for this trip. Also, she did not need to worry about minor injuries as she had excellent healing ability after transforming into a wolf. During these days, apart from healing the wounds, she spent the rest of time searching for the demonic bear. As the smell became stronger and stronger, Lorgar knew that the chase was about to come to an end, and the victor would soon be decided. She lightly jumped across a puddle. Her paws sank into the wet mud without any sound. She chose to start her attack from a downwind position since this would make it difficult for the beast to detect her presence through smell. She approached the source of the bloody little by little, pinpointed the position of the enemy using her hearing, and slowly lifted the vines in front of her with her front paw. The demonic hybrid bear then appeared in front of her. It was not aware of her arrival as it was busily biting into a stout buck, with blood stains on both of its cheeks. The bear's broken limbs that exposed the bones inside made the scene look even more appalling. For ordinary animals that suffered such severe wounds, they would typically opt to hide and recover first before doing anything else. But the bear seemed not to care about the wounds and instead acted as if nothing else mattered other than filling up its stomach. The wolf girl tensed up her hind legs and went into a prone position. This time she intended to destroy its 4 eyes first so that it would have no chance to escape. Just as she was ready to go, footsteps could be heard coming from the depths of the jungle. Lorgar was stunned for a moment. Why are there such orderly footsteps in the depths of the barbarian land? The new group's footsteps were very heavy and loud, and they apparently didn't care about making their presence known. The alternating sounds of 1-2 footsteps meant that they were humans, and there were more than one. Did some hunters from Neverwinter lose their way? No, she immediately rejected this idea. It would take over 10 days to come here from the border of Grey Castle. Considering the dense forest and wild grassland, it would take more time if they had to walk on land. Not to mention the fact that there were fierce beasts and snakes everywhere once you pass the grasslands. Moreover, hybrid demonic beasts roamed the grounds around the Tequila ruins. Even if someone had lost their way, they wouldn't have been able to reach here alive. Lorgar suddenly thought of an answer. A seemingly reasonable answer, and one that was much anticipated by her. At that moment, she felt the hair on her body stand up straight, and her heart started to beat violently. Though she was extremely nervous, her body instantly entered a battle-ready state. The demonic bear also noticed this unusual sound. It dropped the half-eaten deer leg, climbed up and roared toward the direction of the footsteps. The bush shook, and the staggered branches were pushed open. 2 ugly and ferocious monsters then emerged out of the shadows. They had dark brown skin and muscled arms, and also wore skull helmets and held deadly-looking bone spears. Exactly the same as Lightning had described. They were the demons. She had finally found them. The moment the demons appeared, the demonic hybrid bear launched its attack. It lifted its still intact front paw and plunged toward the newcomers who dared disturb its feast at a speed which far exceeded that of which should be possible for something as large as itself. In addition to the demonic bear's power, the charge was further strengthened by the momentum of its entire body. This move was no less deadly than the 4-winged eagle's dive from the sky. If it were Lorgar facing the charge, she would definitely try to avoid it. After all, she was not an extraordinary and would have to pay a huge price to block this strike. But instead of dodging, one of the demons stepped forward, and one of its arms quickly swelled and clashed directly against the giant palm of the demonic beast. With a muffled sound, the 2 monsters crashed into each other. It was a stalemate. Neither the demonic bear nor the demon could push further. But the demon was much shorter than the bear, so it would be unfavorable for the demon if this had dragged on. However, there was more than one demon. Another mad demon had taken the bone spear and aimed it at the hybrid demonic beast. The fight was going to end in a moment, and Lorgar had but moments to spare if she wished to take action. Leave or stay? Although the tube on the back of the demon is its weakness, it is still difficult to deal with. She suddenly recalled Lightning's warning. If you meet the enemies, you'd better immediately retreat and report it to His Majesty. Reason also told her that she needed to retreat, but her instincts were telling her otherwise as a burning sensation surged through her body. No, this was not something that she needed to think about. It was dangerous, but this was what she came for, wasn't it? According to the information, the mad demon would experience a significant period of weakness after its arms had swelled. Lorgar could take advantage of this even if she were fighting against 2 demons. Shoo! With a piercing sound, the bone spear shot through the air. At the same time, Lorgar pounced out of the shadows and bit towards the demon which was still struggling against the bear. Chapter 898, Dark Tide. Translator, Trans-En Editor, Trans-En. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. With a flash of white, the bone spear directly pierced the demonic bear's chest. It had happened so quickly that it could not be captured by the naked eye. If it were Logar that was the target, with that kind of distance, she could not have avoided it. It seemed that the demon was aware of the giant wolf that leaped out of the bush, but it was unable to block or avoid the attack as its right hand was still struggling with the demonic bear's paw. It only managed to raise its other arm to protect its head by instinct. This action protected its throat but left its left arm exposed to Princess Lorgar. Without the slightest hesitation, she bit into the demon's arm and tore it apart. The heavy taste of blood immediately spread into her mouth. Compared to the enormous demonic bear, which had near impenetrable skin, the mad demon's skin was similar to a human's in softness. Even though they had bulging muscles, their flesh was still as soft as a piece of cloth between Lorgar's fangs. The effortlessness with which Lorgar's fangs tore apart the demon's arm gave her an immediate confidence boost. Lorgar then moved past the demon and created a distance between them. She remained unhurt while one of her enemies had lost the means needed to continue the fight. That was undoubtedly an extremely successful attack. The badly hurt mad demon did not move until the hybrid demonic beast fell. It then stumbled back a few steps and roared at her angrily. However, it had lost its left arm and its right arm had now shrunk. It was barely able to keep itself up, let alone be a threat to her. But at this moment, the other demon's actions surprised Lorgar. She saw it take out a horn from its pocket and began blowing into it. Woo! Its deep sound broke the silence of the forest and scared off a group of birds. What does this mean? Are there other demons nearby? But she had already scouted out the area. With the exception of beehives and bird nests, which Lightning had asked her to mark, she did not find anything else worthwhile around here. Lorgar decided not to think about it and would first kill the one-armed demon. Even if they had reinforcements, there would only be corpses waiting for them by the time they arrived. She rushed forward and pounced towards the demon. The demon dropped its horn, pulled out a stone axe that was hanging on its waist, and slashed towards the wolf girl. If this had happened 6 months ago, Lorgar would have chosen to avoid its edge, stepped back, and looked for another opportunity. However, after the battle with the extraordinary, the four-winged eagle, and many kinds of hybrid demonic beasts, she had made many improvements in terms of her combat skill. Lorgar lowered her body and extended her hand and leg to one side, and sprung from this seemingly awkward angle with her body nearly flying out sideways. The axe missed its target. However, this move by Lorgar wasn't merely just a dodge. When the demon's attention was distracted by her movements and fixated on her mouth and claws, she launched her real attack. Lorgar curled her huge tail and swept it towards the back of the demon's head. This blow took full advantage of her body's momentum and was just like an invisible hook. Thud. With a muffled sound, the surprised demon flew away and hit a nearby tree. Its stone axe was flung to the ground. Roar. Just as Lorgar was ready to seize the opportunity to deal the finishing blow with her claws, she suddenly heard a shrill roar from behind. Her instincts warned her of immediate danger. She turned around and swept her paws sideways to block the one-armed mad demon which had rushed towards her. Her claw struck hard and cracked the ribs of the demon, even piercing through the leather armor on its body. This was a suicidal attack. It seemed that the demon had deliberately embraced her giant paw with its body. Why? Lorgar immediately knew the answer to her question before the thought had barely left her mind. The shrunken right arm of the one-armed mad demon began to swell up again. Wasn't it only supposed to recover after 7 minutes? Lorgar was shocked and tried to get away from the enemy. However, her claw was tightly clung onto by the demon as if pinched by an iron plier. Why? Does it? She quickly turned to the other demon that was struck by her tail, and her heart sank. The demon's arm also swelled up, and a few veins even burst out of its dry skin. Wait a second. She suddenly remembered what Lightning had said. When they encountered the demons on the hot air balloon in the Great Snow Mountain of the western region, the mad demon did show the ability to throw spears twice within a short period of time. However, the strength of the second throw had decreased dramatically, and the demon's arm, which was embedded with magic stone, was rendered useless. It could be described as a suicidal technique, and not very threatening. She was stupid to believe what Lightning had said. She couldn't believe this. Lorgar had almost got herself killed by the words of a foolish girl. Although this desperate struggle by the demons would cause them severe backlash, it could also cause huge trouble for their opponent, especially in a life-and-death situation such as this one. There was a common saying in the Sand Nation which could explain this current situation: beware a cornered fighter. Since they had already put their life aside, their last blows would naturally be deadly. The demon that was holding Lorgar's arm was not able to completely restrain her actions. This would only be possible for an extraordinary. However, Lorgar understood that her opponent's purpose was to slow down her movement. Even if she tried to turn around or dodge, she would not be able to escape the other demon's fatal blow. In just a few seconds, the mad demon's arm had swelled to its maximum size, and blue blood spurted out from the cracked skin as if the whole arm was going to explode at any moment. It held its last bone spear and aimed it at the wolf girl. At this moment, Lorgar could only take a gamble. Lorgar opened her eyes wide and focused on every movement made by the enemy. For a moment, the world seemed to have turned silent. The only sound she could hear was her own heartbeat. As soon as the mad demon threw the spear, she cut off the surging magic power in her body. Her body began to quickly shrink in size, creating a huge gap in the initially tight grasp of the mad demon. To the spear-throwing demon, it basically had its target swapped out at the last moment. The bone spear, which flew through the air like a streak of lightning towards the head of the huge desert wolf, pierced the broken-arm demon instead. At this point, she had already finished transforming back to her human form. She won the gamble. The spear-thrower did not expect her to do this. Stunned, it held its now withered arm and uttered out 2 syllables when Princess Lorgar walked in front of it. Ta-ka. Lorgar then transformed one hand into a wolf's claw and crushed the demon's helmet. As the red mist dispersed, the demon collapsed to the ground with a soft thud. Only then did Lorgar dare to relax and let out a long breath. She had won. 1 versus 2. The demons were not that strong after all. Even though the demons were amazingly powerful after strengthening their arms, they had no combat skills at all. They mainly fought by instinct, which was a waste of their physique and talent. In terms of the warrior's path, the demons had not reached very far at all. She believed that hunting would become easier for her if she had a few more encounters with these demons. The vast barbarian land that spread out around her would become the best place for training. Then Lorgar heard the sound of tremors. It was as if the earth itself was shaking. It felt as if an immense force started to roll over the lands like a tsunami. Sh. How is this possible? She frowned a little and raised her ears towards the source. She was in the land close to Grey Castle. This was not like the southernmost region, which was close to the sea. She was not supposed to hear waves here. Was it a flood? But there was no mountains or rivers here, so a flood wouldn't be possible. Lorgar looked around and climbed up the highest tree she could find. The tremor came from the direction of the Tequila ruins. The next moment startled the wolf girl as she stood at the end of one of the tree's branches. She saw countless demons appear on the horizon, moving forward like a dark tide. Above the tide were hundreds of devil beasts, flying back and forth in formation. Most inconceivable of all was the group of colossal monsters stomping their way toward the ruins. They were as tall as 10-story buildings, and the 4 twisted legs could almost climb over Tequila's city walls directly. Anyone standing in front of them would look insignificant. That's not even considering how hard it would be to launch an attack against it. Even just standing in front of it would make a person lose their will to fight. Lorgar looked up at the sky, which was particularly blue after the rain. A soft breeze would blow past every once in a while and the white clouds floated in the sky. Everything was as it should be and it seemed so quiet and peaceful. Lorgar neither saw the bloody moon that symbolized the doomsday described by lightning nor did she see the gloomy and depressing red mist. But she knew that disaster had come knocking. Chapter 899, The Witches from Afar, Part 1, I See the Port. Molly's sudden exclamation immediately drew the attention of the witches on deck. Where? Sigh, we're finally almost there. It has been about half a month since we started to float around the sea. That silver speck over there is another ship, isn't it? Didn't somebody said that only the Charming Beauty sails on this route? Then it's probably a fishing boat. Everybody went to the railing and stood on tiptoes to get a better look at where Molly was pointing to. Seeing the witches all excited and cheerful, the old Captain Jack the One-Eyed shook his head with a smile. He turned to Camilla Derry, who unlike the rest of the witches, had a stern look on her face, and asked, "You don't look quite excited. What's wrong? Today is a good day." "Good in what way?" Camilla replied indifferently. "Good to be home." Jack shook his pipe and said, "Is returning to your homeland after so many years not worth celebrating? It is obvious that you guys never considered the sleeping island as your home. Not that I'm saying you dislike living at the fjords, but after all, a refuge is still just a refuge." Camilla didn't know what to say to that. She did not know whether Jack was right, but she knew that most of the witches who were willing to go to the western region of Grey Castle had increased after the arrival of Princess Tilly's letter. Initially, only half of the witches wanted to go, but the number had risen to around 80% after. If the first batch of witches were able to properly settle in Grey Castle, then it would be hard to say how many of the witches would still be left in Sleeping Island. Sleeping Island should have been their home. It was a place where they wouldn't be hated for being who they are, and also where the church did not constantly threaten their lives. Although the island was relatively underdeveloped compared with the kingdoms on the continent and had a huge difference in terms of local customs and traditions, she believed that Sleeping Island would prosper given 10 more years. Perhaps it would not even take one generation before newly awakened witches treated the island as their real hometown. After a long silence, Camilla spoke in a low voice, "I wish what you said was true." Jack stroked his beards. "You don't trust the new king? How did you know?" Camilla looked up. "It was written on your face." The old captain smiled. "Do you remember what you looked like 3 years ago when you sailed out for the first time?" 3 years ago, the steward of Sleeping Island contemplated for a while. That was when Princess Tilly started to gather the witches and encouraged them to leave Grey Castle. As one of the few captains who did not discriminate against witches, Jack and the Charming Beauty had smuggled a large number of witches from harbor cities to the fjords with the risk of getting caught and being sent to trial. That was why Sleeping Island had built a long-lasting and intimate friendship with the One-Eyed Captain. Perhaps worn out and frightened? Camilla answered hesitantly. "Worn out and frightened?" Jack burst into laughter. "Just that? You were no better than a bunch of walking dead at that time, all beaten up and desperate. Look at yourselves now. Don't you feel completely different? The past is the past. You should look ahead." Some of the witches had already been to Neverwinter several times. If it were really that miserable of a place, they wouldn't have such bright smiles on their faces right now. "But the nobles are all two-faced, but are you?" The captain interrupted her. "If I remember correctly, you're also from a noble family, aren't you? You were better dressed than anyone else the day you left Grey Castle. Civilians can't afford silk fabrics. If I detested nobles like you do back then, what would have had happened?" Camilla opened her mouth, grasping for words that did not come. Jack the One-Eyed slowly blew a tendril of white smoke. "I don't think you can judge a person only by his background. Other than the 3 gods, who can choose their own family? The same goes for witches. Don't you think that you hating nobles because they are nobles is the same as people blindly hating witches?" The words sent a faint shiver through Camilla's heart. "Perhaps you could say that you understand what the nobles are because you were one of them. But don't forget that your prejudice could potentially harm someone innocent, as long as there exists a person that doesn't fit your mold." The old captain paused for a second and said, "Sorry, child. I am probably not the best person to lecture you on this, but I don't want to see you let your past cloud your judgment. What I said doesn't only apply to this matter. After all, people can't always live in the past." No, nobody else would say something like this to me, Camilla thought to herself. Princess Tilly must know that people should look forward to the future and not live in the past. That was why she had voluntarily traveled to Neverwinter. However, Camilla knew Princess Tilly would never be so open to her, and certainly would not criticize her hatred for the nobles. Their intimate relationship and the respects Tilly had for her prevented the princess from giving her further counsels. Perhaps, the old captain was the only person on Sleeping Island who would view her as a child. Camilla breathed out a long sigh and said, "You may be right." "Right?" Jack chuckled. "I'm old and happen to have a lot of similar experiences. If I don't always keep optimistic, I wouldn't have been able to sail on the sea for this long. But the things are most likely going to get tough in the near future." "Why? Who else would board the charming beauty once you witches all return to the main continent? I've heard from those big chambers of commerce that a new type of ship that doesn't require a sail will soon replace the current wooden boats and be used by the majority of the merchants at fjords. Those new ships would be a lot faster than this old baby and can also carry a lot more. I bet nobody will ever use her again. Not even for transporting cargo. I can probably talk to Princess Tilly about this." "Talk about what? Do you want to support me for the rest of my life?" The old captain tapped his pipe. "That'll be a little too early. My legs haven't given away yet. In fact, I plan to join Sir Thunder's expedition team after you guys arrive at Grey Castle." "Expedition?" Camilla echoed in surprise. "That's right. If I can find something in an unexploited sea across Shadow Islands, the money I can earn from that will be more than enough to let me build my own fleet if I wanted to. Not to mention supporting myself." Jack the One-Eyed turned around and looked at the vast ocean spiritedly. "Although I'm getting old and my legs are no longer as nimble as they were used to be, I can guarantee you that no captain in the entire fjords is better at navigating the seas than me." "Really?" Camilla asked in her heart. She glanced at the Fjordian old man as if it were the first time she met him. His appearance was nothing extraordinary, but the current expression on his face perfectly demonstrated his fearlessness in facing the unknown future. "Captain, we are nearing the shores." The lookout perching on the mast yelled. "Do I still have to tell you what to do next?" Jack looked up and stared at him. "Take in the sail and slow her down." Camilla looked toward the dock area and found there were red banners of different kinds everywhere, all of which read "Welcome to Neverwinter." Among the people who came to greet them, there were not only witches but also ordinary people. She even saw a column of children around 11 to 12 years old, each of them with a bouquet in their hands. The children were standing next to the trestle waiting for the witch's arrival. "Such a marvelous reception." The old captain whistled. "Just for the way the king is greeting you, you should give him some more credit, right?" He then waved his arm at the busy sailors on the deck. "Lads, get ready to dock. We've arrived at Neverwinter." Chapter 900, The Witches from Afar, Part 2. "Is this really all right?" Wendy said quietly as she pointed to the ordinary people on the dock. "I mean, we hired random people to greet the witches from Sleeping Island. If the witches knew the truth, they surely wouldn't be pleased about it. Are you able to find any residents who truly welcome their arrival?" Scroll asked in an equally low voice. "No." Wendy hesitated for a moment and shook her head. Indeed, it was hard to find even one or two residents who would welcome the witches from the bottom of their heart, let alone a group of them. Although citizens in Neverwinter had gradually started to accept the witches under Roland's influences, and some witches were even adored by the public, the immigrants from Sleeping Islands were strangers to them. It was basically impossible to ask people to stop their work and greet a group of witches they had never met. Without kind Roland's presence, only the families of the First Army could be persuaded to do so. Therefore, there's nothing wrong with His Majesty's arrangement. Scroll shrugged. All the expenses incurred in this welcoming has already been included in Neverwinter's budget, including the expenses for those big red bouquets, banners, and family greeting teams. If you don't use that part of the money, the other departments will. His Majesty originally planned to have the welcome reception on a much bigger scale than this. Well, you might be right. Wendy swiped at the non-existent sweat on her forehead. His Majesty had been extremely excited ever since Princess Tilly had told him that the witches on Sleeping Island were coming here. Apart from what Scroll had just mentioned, Roland had also listed many other welcome events on his memo, such as ceremonial parades, a musical, and fireworks. Had the news from Hillfox not prompted Roland to carry out his war plan immediately, Roland would have hosted the ceremony himself, which undoubtedly would have made things even more jubilant and spectacular. Scroll said smilingly, "That's why directly hiring people is the best option. We don't just recruit random guys. Those selected ones are all families with good city hall records. You don't need to worry." She took a short pause and continued, "The witches are coming. Go meet them, Ms. Chief of the Union." Scroll. Wendy raised her voice, looking at the former reproachfully. Then she gave Princess Tilly a curt nod before walking up to the guests who came here all the way from the island. "Nice to meet you." As the two groups of witches met each other, Wendy opened her arms and greeted them with her most gentle voice while smiling. "I'm the superintendent of the Witch Union. Welcome to Neverwinter." According to the agreement, the witches from Sleeping Island were only considered as ordinary subjects of the Western region and would not be under the management of the Witch Union. As such, Wendy decided to take them to the residential area first and have a rough head count so that the city hall would know how much food to provide to the new group of witches. As for the subsequent tour and work schedules, she planned to discuss that with Lady Tilly only after everybody settled down. The construction of the residential area exclusively for the use of the witches from Sleeping Island had been completed 2 months before their arrival. It was located close to the Miracle Building and was named Sleeping Spell, the same name used by the Bounty Guild. Some of the witches gasped at the sight of the magnificent building, which was now 6 stories high. They were especially impressed with the polished and glossy surface of the concrete. "Are these real stones? Why do they look so smooth? We're not going to be staying here, are we? Stop dreaming. This must be the Lord's castle. The view from the top floor must be breathtaking." Seeing everyone was burning with curiosity, Wendy took this opportunity to make a brief introduction. "The building is only half complete at the moment. Once the construction is done, it will reach 55 meters, which is 180 feet and 5 inches. But His Majesty doesn't live here. His castle is only 3 stories tall and is located in the center of Neverwinter." "That's so tall. Aren't you afraid that it'll collapse one day?" someone questioned in surprise. Wendy smiled. "His Majesty invented a special construction material that can convert fluid slimes to solid stones. This is simply a pilot project. He told us that we will be able to build architecture as tall as the mountains with this type of material. Of course, the whole project cannot be successfully completed without the help of the witches. In fact, this building is the result of the joint efforts of the witches and numerous construction workers. Am I right, Lotus? Hey, did you really build this? But isn't your ability elevating Earth?" All the witches rested their eyes on Lotus. A little embarrassed, Lotus scratched her head and answered, "I just build slopes for the workers. When they need to add another floor, I elevate the surrounding earth to create a platform next to the building to make it a bit more convenient for the construction workers." "Did they hate or show disgust at you because you're a witch?" As expected, someone raised the question that everybody was most concerned about. "I haven't come across anyone like that yet. I think they've already started to treat me like a normal person." Lotus waved her hand. "Sometimes, the workers will even share pancakes with me if I went to work early." This was the exact effect Wendy desired to achieve. Perhaps a lot of you are still cautious of the people here and wonder how you'll be treated in the future. That's perfectly normal. After all, Neverwinter to you is a completely foreign city. I don't think I have to go on about the miseries that had fallen upon us witches over this past century. However, I assure you that you'll feel at home here, just like the city name endowed by His Majesty suggests. I understand that you aren't a member of the Witch Union, but please don't hesitate to ask me for help if you encounter any difficulties. No matter how small it seems to be, I'm here for you." "Good job." Scroll gave Wendy a thumbs up and whispered to her approvingly. Wendy did not expect, however, that the first problem arose when she tried to gather the personal information of the witches. "Why do you need such information?" A red-haired witch protested after Wendy distributed the forms. Didn't you agree not to force us to stay here? I just plan to stay here for a couple of days, so I don't think it's necessary. Me too. Princess Tilly told us that we could leave Neverwinter whenever we wanted to. I want to go back to the eastern region right now. Since the church is gone now, I don't think it's necessary to disclose our personal information. It'll put us in a very disadvantageous position if the information leaks to someone with malicious intent. There were quite a few witches who opposed to registering their personal information. I knew it. It's Ozima and her little clique again. Ashes knitted her brows. Ozima? Wendy asked in surprise. A witch organization from the eastern region. Sorry, they don't really acknowledge my leadership, Tilly explained in a low voice. But they're at least much better than the Bloodfang Association. Tilly turned to the red-haired witch and said, I understand that you yearn to return to the eastern region, but this is not a good time. Although the church has fallen from power, the public is still unfriendly to witches, not to mention those nobles. The situation is particularly bad in the eastern region. Before Roland officially retrieves that area, the attitude of people toward witches would not change much over there. How do you know that if you haven't been there? Ozima persisted. Or maybe you're just favoring your brother? Mind your attitude. Ashes retorted coldly. Why? Are you going to pick a fight with me here, like you did to Heidi and Skyflare? Wendy bit her lip. She did not foresee such a bitter confrontation, but she could not find a proper way to ease the tension between the two parties. Just at that moment, Scroll stepped forward. Mind if I ask you a few questions? She asked.